It was late October when Sarah and her friends decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains of West Virginia. The idea had been Sarah's. She'd read about a small, off-the-grid cabin that could be rented online, described as isolated, rustic, and perfect for a weekend getaway. The promise of crisp autumn air, the scent of fallen leaves, and the thought of sitting by a roaring fireplace had convinced them all. There were four of them: Sarah, Mark, Jenna, and Chris, and they had loaded the SUV with camping gear, snacks, and enough alcohol to last the weekend. The drive started off normally. The roads were winding, flanked by dense forests whose branches were bare in some spots, reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. It was dusk, and the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. They were following the directions from a website map, but the more they drove, the narrower and rougher the roads became. Eventually, they hit a point where the GPS signal flickered in and out, and Sarah, who was driving, suggested taking a side road to cut a corner. "That looks faster," she said, pointing toward a dirt road that plunged into the woods. Mark frowned from the passenger seat. "Are you sure? It doesn't look maintained." "It's fine," Sarah replied. "It's just a shortcut. The cabin isn't that far from here." They turned onto the dirt road. At first, it seemed fine. Gravel under tires, tall trees enclosing the road like a tunnel. But after a few minutes, the atmosphere changed. The forest became denser, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and a damp fog started curling across the path. Chris joked about the fog making it feel like a horror movie set, but Jenna wasn't laughing. She said she had a strange feeling like they were being watched, but everyone dismissed it as nerves. The road forked, and without thinking, Sarah chose the left path. The SUV bounced over potholes and tree roots, and the tires crunched over loose rocks. Then the engine sputtered. Did you hear that?" Chris asked. "What?" "The car. I don't know, it's stuttering." Sarah hit the gas, and the engine roared back to life, but only for a moment. Then it died again. Panic started creeping in. "Let's just stop," Mark said, leaning back in his seat. "We're alone out here, and it's getting dark fast." The SUV sat idling weakly. The fog was thick now, almost choking the road, and the towering trees seemed to bend closer as if they were trying to block the path forward. Chris tried to call for help, but the cell service was gone. Jenna's anxiety escalated. She insisted they hadn't taken the right turn and that they were lost. "Lost? We just left the highway 5 minutes ago." Sarah snapped, more to reassure herself than anyone else. "Maybe that's the problem," Jenna said. "We're not on the right road. We should go back." Sarah attempted to reverse, but the SUV felt like it was sinking into the dirt. The tires spun uselessly, and the engine wouldn't respond. The forest seemed to close in around them, shadows flickering between trees, shapes that looked almost human but were gone when they blinked. Chris suggested walking to find help, but the forest was thick and the fog swallowed any hint of direction. They decided to stay with the car until morning, lighting a few flashlights to try and pierce the darkness. Hours passed slowly, each sound amplified in the stillness. Branches cracking, distant howls, the rustling of leaves. Jenna kept whispering that she could hear someone moving outside the car, circling them. The others tried to joke it off, attributing it to the wind, but every so often the sound of footsteps would pause when the lights swept across the fog. Around midnight, a shadow appeared at the edge of the beams, a figure standing perfectly still. It was tall, thin, wearing dark clothes that blended into the night. No facial features could be seen. "Who's there?" Sarah yelled, her voice trembling. No response. The figure didn't move, but it seemed to grow taller, or maybe it was closer than it had appeared. Jenna screamed, throwing her flashlight at it, but it passed right through, vanishing like smoke. The group froze, and the temperature in the SUV dropped sharply. Their breaths fogged the air inside the car. Okay, maybe we just need to sleep," Mark said, trying to rationalize it. "It's probably a deer or something. We're tired and stressed." But sleep wasn't an option. Every time they closed their eyes, they heard scratching on the roof of the car, faint whispers in a language they couldn't understand, and the heavy crunch of footsteps approaching and receding. At one point, Sarah swore she saw multiple shadows just outside the windshield watching them silently. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. The SUV was still stuck. Exhausted and terrified, they decided to walk. Chris led the way, using his phone's flashlight. The forest seemed endless, trees bending unnaturally, paths twisting and doubling back on themselves. Hours of walking brought nothing but more trees, more fog, more oppressive silence. Then they saw it. The road they had originally taken appeared out of nowhere, perfectly paved, as if the dirt path had never existed. Relieved, they ran toward it, but when they reached the edge of the asphalt, they realized the road led back toward a small, abandoned town. The buildings were falling apart, windows boarded up, the streets overgrown with weeds. Not a single car or person was in sight, and yet the air was filled with a palpable sense of waiting. Something drew them forward. They didn't know if it was hope or fear, but they entered the town. The houses seemed to lean toward them, windows dark but glowing faintly from inside. A thick silence hung over everything, heavier than the fog outside. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like someone murmuring just out of reach, then louder, chanting in the same indecipherable language they had heard the night before. The ground beneath their feet became uneven, and patches of blackened soil appeared. It smelled like burnt hair and rusted metal. They walked past one house, and the door creaked open as if pushed by an invisible hand. Inside, shadows moved against the walls, twisting, elongating, whispering. Something in the room seemed alive, aware of their presence. Chris threw a rock at the door, and it slammed shut on its own. Panic set in. They ran. Every street led them back to the same central square, where a well stood, old and rusted, water black and still inside. Around the well, figures appeared, dozens of them, hunched, faceless, standing perfectly still. The chanting grew louder, an unbearable, bone-shaking noise. One of the figures moved. It stepped out of the shadows and toward them, long, skeletal arms reaching. Mark screamed and tried to run, but the ground beneath him seemed to warp, pulling him back. Jenna and Chris grabbed Sarah's arms, but it was like wading through thick mud. Every step forward felt like moving underwater. The figure stopped a few feet away from them. Then another appeared. Then another, until the square was filled with these black, silent shapes. The chanting became coherent, a single word repeated over and over. Stay. They ran blindly, crashing through buildings, windows breaking, floors giving way. Each room seemed to trap them for seconds that felt like hours, corridors twisting into impossible angles. Every turn led them back to the square. Eventually, they found an alleyway that opened to a highway. They didn't hesitate. They ran to the road, waving their arms at passing cars, but no one stopped. Finally, a truck appeared, headlights piercing the fog. The driver slowed and saw their terror-stricken faces. "Get in! Get in!" Sarah yelled. They piled into the truck, and the driver slammed the accelerator. The town faded behind them, disappearing as though it had never existed. When they reached a small gas station hours later, they tried to call the police. But the dispatcher said no town existed in that area. No abandoned roads, no reports of missing travelers. Their GPS showed nothing but continuous. They returned to the cabin, the website promised, only to find it was also a ghost listing, never existed. Weeks later, the friends avoided the roads near that area, yet they could never forget the chanting, the faceless figures, the oppressive fog. Sarah sometimes woke up screaming. Visions of the well and the square burned into her mind. None of them spoke about the town out loud, but the memory lingered, an unwelcome shadow over every night they spent in the dark. And sometimes, late at night when driving on empty roads, they swear they see it again. A shadow at the edge of the headlights, standing still, waiting for them to take a wrong turn. Story the end. On a cold November evening, 3 friends, Evan, Lily, and Tyler, were driving through rural Pennsylvania on their way to a concert in Pittsburgh. They had left after work, and by the time they hit the back roads, the sun had already sunk behind the tree line. The highway lights vanished, replaced by endless darkness, broken only by the car's headlights slicing through the fog. They'd been joking and laughing earlier, but the energy in the car had shifted. The GPS had started glitching about 30 minutes ago, the voice cutting in and out before freezing completely. The last thing it said was, "Turn left in 1 mile." But when they reached the turn, there was no street sign, just a narrow, cracked asphalt road disappearing into the trees. "Should we take it?" Lily asked. Evan, who was driving, squinted at the dim outline of the road. "It's the only one around here that looks like a turn. GPS said left, so yeah, I guess." Tyler groaned from the back seat. Man, that road looks like something out of a murder movie. Let's just find another route. Evan laughed, but there was tension in it. We'll be fine. It's just a shortcut. They turned onto the road, and instantly the woods swallowed them. The headlights barely reached the trees ahead, their branches arched overhead, knitting together so tightly that the sky disappeared. The road twisted like a snake, sharp turns and sudden dips that made the car lurch. After a few minutes, Lily noticed that the fog seemed thicker, unnaturally so. It didn't drift or move like normal fog. It hung still, dense like smoke. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Tyler sniffed. "Yeah, it smells like metal, like blood." Evan said nothing. He just kept driving, trying to stay focused on the barely visible lines. But there were none. Just cracked asphalt bordered by trees that looked identical in every direction. The road narrowed even more until it felt like they were driving through a forest trail instead of a road. Then came the first odd thing, a wooden sign by the road, barely visible in the beam of the headlights. It read Hollow Creek in faded, hand-painted letters. "You ever hear of Hollow Creek?" Lily asked. Tyler shook his head. "Nope. Sounds made up." They drove on, hoping to see a house or even another car. Instead, they found an old bridge, a narrow wooden structure that creaked under the car's weight. Beneath it, a slow, black stream reflected the headlights in broken ripples. Halfway across the bridge, the engine sputtered. "Not this again," Evan muttered, tapping the gas pedal. The car jerked forward, then stopped completely. The headlights flickered once and went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Tyler cursed. "This is some horror movie crap. We should have stayed on the main road." Lily tried her phone, no service. Evan attempted to start the car, but it only made a strangled noise before dying completely. Then came the sound. From somewhere deep in the woods, a faint, high-pitched whistling floated through the air. It wasn't wind. It had rhythm, like someone softly blowing a tune. Evan froze. "You hear that?" They all did. The whistling was getting closer, slow and steady, echoing across the trees. "Maybe it's another car or someone camping," Lily whispered, though her voice trembled. Tyler leaned forward, peering out the windshield. "You see anyone?" The fog was so thick that visibility was no more than 10 feet. But through it, the faint outline of something moved, a human figure walking slowly toward them down the bridge. "Hey!" Evan called, rolling down the window slightly. "Hey, can you help us? Our car's dead." The figure didn't respond. The whistling stopped. The air turned ice cold. Then, as the fog shifted, they saw it clearly. The figure was barefoot, its clothes torn, its skin pale and stretched thin over its bones, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It wasn't walking so much as dragging one leg, step by slow step, toward them. Lily screamed, and Evan slammed the car into reverse. The engine roared to life suddenly, tires spinning on the slick wood as the vehicle lurched backward off the bridge. They didn't stop until they were a good 100 feet away, the bridge now a faint shadow in the mist. "What the hell was that?" Tyler gasped. Evan didn't answer. He just floored the gas pedal again, the car bouncing over potholes as they sped deeper down the road. But the strange part was, it didn't seem to end. The more they drove, the more the forest looked the same. Every turn led to another, every bend looked identical. The fog never lifted. They saw the same sign again, Hollow Creek. Lily's voice cracked. "We passed that before. We're going in circles." Evan gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. "No, that's impossible. I've been going straight." But it wasn't impossible. The GPS flickered back to life briefly, its screen showing nothing but static, and then suddenly, the same set of coordinates repeating over and over. The same sound that had once guided them now distorted into a low, mechanical hum that almost sounded like whispering. Then ahead, the headlights caught a shape on the side of the road. It was a car, a black SUV, same model as theirs, parked at an angle. "What the?" Tyler leaned forward. "That looks like—" "It's our car," Lily said softly. And it was. The same dent on the bumper, the same cracked taillight. Their car, parked there, headlights off, engine dead. But they were sitting in their car. Evan slowed, staring. His pulse thundered in his ears. The other SUV's windows were fogged, but he swore he saw movement inside. Shapes, silhouettes of people sitting inside. Then the figure appeared again. Standing next to the other car, head still tilted, one arm raised as if pointing right at them. Evan hit the gas. The car roared forward, skidding on the damp road. They didn't look back. The trees blurred into streaks, the fog closing behind them like a curtain. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. The clock on the dashboard blinked 12 repeatedly, refusing to move forward. Then, without warning, the road widened and they burst out onto a paved highway. Evan pulled over, heart racing. The fog was gone. The night was clear. Behind them, the forest stood silent, still. They sat there in stunned silence until a passing car stopped to ask if they were okay. The driver told them there was no road called Hollow Creek in that area, never had been. When they finally reached Pittsburgh the next morning, they didn't talk about it. But later, while unpacking, Lily found something strange wedged between the seat and the door. A small, carved wooden figure, shaped like a man with its head tilted to one side. Evan threw it away immediately, but that night, as they lay in their motel room, he woke to the sound of faint whistling outside their window. He looked, but there was nothing there, just fog creeping up from the ground, swirling in the pale light. Story the end. The rain had been coming down since late afternoon, washing the color out of the Tennessee backroads and turning the world gray. It was supposed to be a quick drive home from a job site near the mountains, 5 hours, maybe 6 if traffic was bad. But somewhere along the way, Ryan made a wrong turn. He didn't realize it at first. The sign he missed was bent and half covered with vines, and by the time his GPS caught up, it was already too late. The road he was on was narrow and winding, cutting through thick woods that pressed in from both sides. The rain made everything look slick and unreal, headlights bouncing off sheets of water and fog that seemed to rise straight from the ground. His phone's GPS spun for a moment before freezing. The screen glowed uselessly, a blue arrow stuck in place on a road that didn't seem to exist. Ryan cursed softly and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. He couldn't remember the last time he'd passed another car. Even the radio had gone to static a few miles back, as if he'd driven beyond the edge of any signal. He'd grown up around these parts. His grandparents had lived not far from Chattanooga, and he knew how easy it was to get lost if you took the wrong exit or followed a side road too long. But this was different. The woods looked older somehow, like they'd been here before roads or people. He thought about turning back, but the road was too narrow to safely U-turn, and the rain made visibility almost non-existent. He figured he'd go another mile or two, maybe find a driveway or a gas station where he could ask for directions. But the road only seemed to twist deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, their branches interlocking overhead until the sky was a thin gray smear. Then he saw it, a sign barely visible through the rain. It was rusted, its letters faint, but he could make out the words, Miller Hollow, 3 miles. He didn't remember any town by that name. Still, a town meant lights, people, maybe a way to get back to the highway. He pressed on. The rain eased up as he drove, but the fog thickened, rising off the wet asphalt in ghostly waves. The forest on either side was eerily still, not even a rustle of leaves or the call of an animal. Every now and then, he thought he saw movement, shapes that darted between the trees, quick and thin. But when he looked directly, there was nothing. After what felt like longer than 3 miles, he came to a clearing. The road opened into a small town, or what used to be one. The sign at the entrance had fallen over, its wood swollen and cracked. The buildings were old, sagging under the weight of time, their windows dark. A single streetlight flickered weakly near what might have been the main intersection, but everything else was swallowed in shadow. Ryan slowed the truck to a crawl. "Hello?" he called through the open window, but his voice felt small, like it got swallowed by the fog. He stopped near what looked like a general store, its windows boarded, door half open, and stepped out. The air smelled of damp earth and rot, and under that, something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. He looked up and noticed something strange. No power lines, not a single one. Inside the store, shelves leaned against each other, covered in dust and cobwebs. Old cans of food sat rusting in place. There were signs of life, though, recent ones. A pile of wet footprints near the counter, a lantern sitting on a stool, its flame flickering faintly. Ryan's breath caught. "Hello?" The lantern sputtered once, as if in response, then went out. Something creaked behind him. He turned sharply, but there was nothing, just the door swinging slightly on its hinges. The wind had picked up, carrying a low, hollow sound through the town, like a distant voice calling from the woods. Ryan backed out of the store and got into his truck, locking the doors. His hands were trembling as he started the engine. It roared to life, but as he turned the headlights on, the beam caught movement. Someone standing in the middle of the street. The figure was tall and thin, wearing clothes that looked drenched, hanging in tatters. Their face was hidden by the shadow of a hat. But what froze Ryan wasn't their stillness. It was the way the fog around them seemed to cling, like it was alive. He blinked and the figure was suddenly closer. Heart pounding, Ryan slammed the gear into reverse, backing away fast, tires splashing in puddles. He turned sharply and sped down the road that led out of town, or what he thought led out. Within minutes, the trees swallowed the town behind him, but the road didn't lead back to where he came from. It forked, and neither direction looked familiar. He took the right path, his instincts screaming to keep moving. The rain started again, harder this time, hammering the roof of the truck. The fog pressed against the windshield, thick and white. Then as he drove, something impossible happened. The shape of a building appeared through the mist. The general store. The same one he just left. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He kept driving, faster. The road wound and twisted, but every turn led him back to the same place. The same sagging buildings, the same flickering streetlight. The lantern inside the store was lit again. He could see someone now, standing just inside the door, waiting. Ryan threw the truck into reverse again, his breathing ragged. He didn't care where the road went anymore. He just had to get out. The tires spun, mud spraying up behind him. The truck jolted, fishtailing wildly, and he barely managed to keep it from slamming into a tree. The road forked again. This time he took the left path. The fog thickened until it was like driving through milk. He could only see a few feet ahead. Then the headlights caught something reflective. Eyes. A deer? He slowed, squinting. But the eyes were too high off the ground. And then they moved, swiftly, unnaturally, across the road, followed by the vague shape of something tall crawling on all fours. Ryan floored it. The thing turned its head toward him as he passed, and for a split second, the headlights caught its face. Or what might have been one. Hollow sockets, a mouth stretched too wide. He didn't look again. After what felt like hours, the fog began to thin. The rain stopped. The road smoothed out, wider now, and up ahead he saw a faint light, a real one. He almost cried when he saw the gas station. It was small, a single pump with a flickering sign that read, "Open." He pulled in fast and jumped out, running for the door. Inside, an old man sat behind the counter, flipping through a newspaper. "You okay there, son?" the man asked, looking up. Ryan tried to catch his breath. I got lost. Took a wrong turn somewhere near Miller Hollow." The old man's eyes changed, his expression tightening. "You sure about that name?" "Yeah," Ryan said. "There was a sign, said Miller Hollow, 3 miles. I followed it, but..." "There ain't been a road by that name for 30 years, the man interrupted. "That town burned down in 92. Whole place went up in the middle of the night. No one made it out. They say the forest swallowed what was left." Ryan felt his stomach drop. "No, that's not possible. I was just there." The man shook his head slowly. "People say on rainy nights that road shows up again, and if you follow it, sometimes you don't come back." Ryan stood frozen. Outside, the fog was starting to roll in again. The old man glanced past him toward the window and frowned. "You better go now, son. Whatever followed you doesn't belong here." Ryan turned. Through the glass, he saw it, a faint figure at the edge of the fog, standing under the streetlight. Watching. He didn't wait. He jumped back into the truck and tore down the highway, the lights of the gas station fading behind him. He didn't stop for miles. When he finally did, he pulled over at a diner off the interstate, shaking, drenched in sweat. He ordered coffee, trying to convince himself it had all been some trick of the rain and exhaustion. Then he noticed the mud on his floor mat. It wasn't normal mud. It was black, thick, and reeked of something foul. And sitting on the passenger seat was a single waterlogged lantern. Its wick flickered once, then went out. Ryan never drove that route again. In fact, he moved north a few months later, putting hundreds of miles between himself and those mountains. But sometimes when the rain comes down hard and the roads glisten like mirrors, he swears he can see a faint light in his rearview mirror. A lantern swinging slowly, following him through the fog. Story the end. It started with an argument. Ryan and his girlfriend, Lauren, were driving back from a weekend in the Catskills, tired and irritated after getting caught in an unexpected downpour. The rain had turned the narrow mountain roads into slick ribbons of mud and fog. Ryan, stubborn as always, had refused to let Lauren drive, even though his eyes were heavy and the GPS kept glitching from the lack of signal. "We should have stayed another night," Lauren muttered, arms crossed, her voice low but sharp. "Yeah, well, I've got work at 7, Ryan snapped, squinting at the cracked windshield wipers as they groaned back and forth. "I'm not wasting another day in the middle of nowhere." The map on his phone refreshed suddenly, rerouting with a ping that startled both of them. A blue line appeared, zigzagging through what looked like an alternate route. "This way's faster," Ryan said, turning onto a narrow road that branched off from the highway. Lauren frowned. "Ryan, it looks like it goes through the woods. There's not even a name on it." "It's fine," he said, forcing a grin. "Probably some old service road. We'll shave off an hour." It wasn't fine. The pavement turned to gravel, then to packed dirt. The trees thickened on either side, their bare branches scraping the roof like claws. The rain turned mist, the fog so dense it swallowed their headlights whole. After 10 minutes, the GPS froze again, like the blue dot pulsing uselessly. Ryan sighed and smacked the screen. "Great. Lost again," Lauren said, pulling her jacket tighter. But it wasn't just being lost. The deeper they drove, the quieter it got. No wind, no rain, no sound except for the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires over the uneven ground. Even the radio gave only static. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong, heavy, expectant. "Do you see that?" Lauren whispered suddenly, leaning forward. Ryan followed her gaze. Up ahead, through the fog, was an old wooden sign hanging crookedly from rusted chains. It read, "Old Creek Hollow." The letters were faded, splintered, but the name sent a chill crawling down Ryan's neck. He slowed the car, hesitant. Never heard of it. "Let's turn back," Lauren said quickly. "Seriously, Ryan, I've got a bad feeling about this." But he shook his head. "We've already come this far. It's probably just a shortcut through some old town." The road narrowed further, twisting sharply between the trees. Occasionally, the headlights would catch glimpses of something in the woods, shapes that seemed to move, but when Ryan looked directly, there was nothing. The fog had a strange way of thickening in pulses, like it was breathing. Then the road dipped suddenly, and the car lurched. They'd driven into a pothole the size of a crater. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then died. Ryan cursed under his breath and tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just a dull click. Lauren's voice trembled. "You're kidding me." "Relax," Ryan muttered, tapping the dashboard. "Probably just flooded the engine." He popped the hood and stepped outside. The air was cold, unnaturally cold. His breath plumed white, even though it wasn't freezing outside. The fog hugged the car like a living thing. As he lifted the hood, the silence pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. That's when he heard it. A faint rustling in the woods. Not wind, footsteps. "Lauren?" he called, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "You hear that?" She rolled down her window slightly. "Ryan, get back in the car." The footsteps stopped. Ryan stood still, staring into the mist. The beam from his phone's flashlight cut only a few feet ahead, catching glimpses of gnarled trunks and wet leaves. Then, just for a moment, he saw it. Something tall, thin, human-shaped but not quite right. Standing between two trees facing him, his heart slammed in his chest. He blinked, and it was gone. "Ryan!" Lauren yelled. He jumped back into the car, slamming the door shut. His hands shook as he tried the ignition again. Still nothing. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Someone's out there," he whispered. I saw something." Lauren's eyes widened. "What do you mean something?" "Just someone standing there, I think." He didn't sound convinced. The fog thickened again, by curling against the windows, obscuring everything outside. Then came the sound, a low, deliberate scraping against the passenger side of the car. Lauren froze. "Ryan!" The scraping stopped. Then something tapped, 3 slow, distinct knocks on her window. "Go, go, go!" she screamed. Ryan twisted the key again, and miraculously, the engine roared to life. He threw the car into reverse and sped backward down the narrow dirt path, the tires skidding wildly. The fog thinned just enough for him to see something in the rearview mirror. Movement, running, keeping pace with the car. It wasn't human. It was too fast. He didn't look again. He kept driving until the dirt road finally spat them back onto pavement. They didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes, both breathing heavily, eyes darting at every shadow that moved. Finally, Lauren broke the silence. "Ryan, what was that?" "I don't know," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we're not talking about it again." They drove until they reached a small roadside diner. The neon sign flickered weakly, but the parking lot was blessedly empty. Ryan parked the car, turned off the engine, and rested his forehead against the steering wheel, trying to calm down. Sighed. Insiner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. A single waitress, pale and middle-aged, looked up from behind the counter. "You kids lost?" she asked. "Yeah," Ryan said, trying to sound casual. "We took a wrong turn somewhere near Old Creek Hollow." Her expression froze. "Where did you say?" "Old Creek Hollow," Lauren repeated. The woman's face went pale. "That road doesn't exist anymore," she whispered. "They closed it off after the floods. No one's lived out that way for 50 years. Ryan frowned. "No, we were just there. There was a sign." The waitress shook her head slowly. "The sign's still there, maybe, but the road? No one should be driving down it." Lauren's hands were trembling as she reached for her coffee. "Why not?" The waitress leaned in, lowering her voice. "They say there was a settlement there in the 1800s. Whole town went missing overnight. No bodies, no nothing. Just empty houses and fog thick enough to choke you. Every few years, someone takes a wrong turn and ends up there. They don't usually come back." Ryan felt a cold sweat break down his neck. "We did." The waitress gave him a strange look. "Then count yourself lucky." They left the diner soon after. Lauren refused to let him drive home without taking the main highway, even if it took twice as long. But the weirdest part came later, when they stopped for gas just outside Albany. The attendant, an old man with a gray beard, stepped out to pump their gas and looked at their license plate. Then he glanced up at Ryan. "You two just come from the Hollow?" he asked. Ryan froze. "How'd you know?" The man pointed to the back of the car. Ryan got out and walked around, and his stomach dropped. The entire rear bumper was covered in long, deep scratches, like claw marks. He stared at them in silence. They weren't there before. The attendant nodded grimly. "You're lucky you didn't stop." Lauren wouldn't look. She kept her eyes straight ahead, whispering under her breath. They got home just before sunrise. The car stayed parked on the street for weeks. Haas and Ryan refused to wash it. He didn't want to see if the marks would fade or if they'd come back. But every now and then, when he drove alone at night, he swore he could see it again. A figure standing by the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of his headlights, always facing him, always waiting. And once, on a foggy morning, he found a smear of muddy footprints leading up to the driver's door. Bare footprints, too large to belong to any one human. Story the end. The night had that kind of darkness that felt thick, almost physical. A mist hung low across the winding back roads of northern Pennsylvania, muffling the sound of the engine as Ryan drove his old Jeep through the forest. He had been on the road since late afternoon, returning home from a weekend fishing trip with a couple of coworkers. They had taken separate cars, and after stopping for gas in a small rural town, Ryan decided to take what looked like a shortcut on his map. It was supposed to cut an hour off the trip back to Pittsburgh. The locals had warned him that the road, County Route 16, wasn't well maintained, but he laughed it off. He was used to rural driving. A little backroad adventure didn't scare him. It started off fine, a narrow two-lane road surrounded by dense trees, the occasional farmhouse appearing in the distance. But within half an hour, the pavement turned rough, riddled with cracks, and eventually became gravel. His GPS flickered, losing its signal in the remote stretch. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the faint hiss of gravel beneath his tires. The forest seemed to press closer as the fog thickened, swallowing his headlights in a ghostly glow. He checked his phone, no service. The battery icon blinked at 15%. He figured he'd drive for another 10 minutes and turn around if it didn't connect back to the main road. But as he drove, the trees began to look the same, repeating patterns that made him uneasy. The road narrowed, the gravel turning to dirt. He slowed down, his tires slipping slightly on the wet surface. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a sign. It was old, wooden, with letters so faded they were barely legible. He slowed the car to read it. Marlow Hollow, 3 miles. He frowned. He hadn't seen that on any map. Maybe it was some tiny settlement. Maybe they'd have a gas station or a phone. He decided to keep going. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. Even the hum of insects had stopped. It was as though the woods were holding their breath. His high beams cut through the mist, illuminating trees that looked warped, bent unnaturally toward the road. He caught sight of something hanging from one of the branches, a shape, pale and long, swaying slowly. As he got closer, his stomach twisted. It was a deer carcass, gutted and strung up by its hind legs, its ribs exposed like a cage. The air reeked of rot and iron. He gagged, speeding past it, but another one appeared 100 feet down the road. Then another. The third wasn't a deer. It was too small. The shape was human-sized, wrapped in cloth, dangling from a tree limb. Ryan slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. The Jeep skidded to a halt, gravel crunching beneath the tires. His hands shook as he reached for his flashlight, shining it toward the hanging figure. The cloth fluttered slightly in the wind, revealing a pale hand. That was enough. He threw the car into reverse, but the rearview mirror showed something that made his blood run cold. Someone was standing behind his car. He froze, unable to breathe. The figure was tall and still, draped in something dark that blended into the forest. He couldn't make out a face, only the faint gleam of two eyes reflecting his taillights. He hit the gas, tires spinning in the mud before catching traction. When he looked again, the figure was gone. His pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't stop driving for what felt like an hour, though it could have been minutes. The trees blurred by, endless and identical. He hadn't seen another sign, another car, or a single light in the distance. Just trees, fog, and that unshakable feeling that someone or something was watching him from the woods. Finally, a sign appeared ahead. Relief washed over him until he read it. Marlow Hollow, 3 miles. His stomach dropped. He slammed on the brakes, staring at the sign in disbelief. He had been driving in a straight line. It wasn't possible. He must have turned without realizing it. He reversed, trying to retrace his path, but after several minutes, the road split unexpectedly into 3 unmarked paths. None looked familiar. He picked the one to the left, hoping it led back to the highway. The fog thickened, making it nearly impossible to see beyond a few feet. The forest felt tighter now, claustrophobic. Branches scraped against the sides of the Jeep, the sound like nails on metal. Then the engine sputtered. The lights flickered. "Come on," he muttered, tapping the dashboard. The engine coughed, then died. The silence that followed was unbearable. No insects, no birds, just the whisper of wind through dead leaves. He tried restarting the car. Nothing. He grabbed his flashlight again and stepped out, the crunch of gravel deafening in the stillness. The air was colder here, the fog almost luminous in his headlights. Something moved in the trees. He swung the flashlight toward the sound, catching a glimpse of something pale slipping behind a trunk. He called out, his voice trembling. "Hey! Is someone there?" No answer. He took a step closer, shining the light into the dense brush. The beam caught something, another wooden sign nailed to a tree. This one read, "Turn back." The letters were carved into the wood, deep and jagged, smeared with something dark. His stomach twisted again. He turned back toward the Jeep, only it wasn't there. The fog had swallowed it whole. Panic surged through him. He stumbled forward, disoriented, calling out, "Hello?" His voice echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the trees. Then, somewhere deeper in the woods, he heard laughter. It was faint, distant, but unmistakably human. A woman's laugh, high-pitched and wrong. He turned in circles, flashlight shaking in his grip. "Who's there?" he shouted. The laughter stopped. Then a new sound replaced it, a soft whisper right behind him. "Don't go." Ryan spun around, but no one was there. The fog shifted, forming shapes that melted back into mist. His heart raced as he backed away, tripping over roots and rocks, until he saw a faint orange glow through the trees. It looked like firelight. Against his better judgment, he ran toward it. The glow came from a clearing. In the center stood a small cabin, old and decrepit, its roof sagging, its windows dark. The fire wasn't inside but outside, burning low in a metal barrel. He hesitated, then stepped closer, calling out, "Hello? I need help. My car broke down." The door creaked open slightly, but no one answered. The smell hit him first, a mix of damp wood and something foul. The interior was dark, except for a faint light flickering in the back room. He pushed the door open wider, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Dust motes swirled in the air. Old furniture sat covered in sheets. and on the far wall hung faded photographs of families, smiling faces in black and white. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. "Hello?" he said again, voice breaking. A creak echoed from upstairs. He aimed the flashlight toward the staircase. "Is someone up there?" he called. The silence that followed felt suffocating. He took a cautious step forward, the floorboards groaning under his boots. Then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. He backed away, hands shaking, flashlight trembling in his grasp. The figure that appeared at the top of the stairs wasn't right. It was human-shaped but too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its movements were jerky, like it didn't know how to use its limbs. As it stepped into the light, Ryan saw its face, or what was left of it. The skin was stretched, stitched crudely, the mouth too wide. It tilted its head, studying him with milky, colorless eyes. Ryan bolted. He didn't look back. He sprinted through the woods, branches slashing his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed alive, shifting around him, trees bending, paths twisting. He fell once, scraping his knees, but forced himself up, running until his lungs burned. Behind him, he could hear it following, those uneven footsteps crunching leaves, gaining ground. He burst out onto a clearing and froze. His Jeep sat there, engine idling, headlights on. Relief flooded through him, though he didn't remember leaving it that way. He jumped in, slamming the door, shifting into gear. The car lurched forward, and he floored it, not daring to look back. The headlights caught glimpses of movement along the roadside, faces peering from the trees, all with the same hollow eyes and too wide smiles. He drove until the road began to widen again, the dirt turning back into gravel, then cracked pavement. The fog started to thin, revealing a sign ahead. Route 22, 5 miles. He laughed, almost crying. He'd made it, but when he looked in the rearview mirror, his laughter died in his throat. Someone was sitting in the back seat. The figure was pale, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, mouth stretched into that impossible grin. Its eyes met his in the mirror. The air turned freezing, his breath visible in the car. He screamed, swerving off the road, crashing into a ditch. The impact knocked him unconscious. When he woke, it was morning. The car was totaled. The windshield cracked, the airbags deployed. He stumbled out, dazed, scanning the road. The fog was gone. Birds chirped overhead. It looked like a normal forest again. But when he looked back down the road, the sign for Marlow Hollow was gone. Authorities found him hours later, wandering along the shoulder of Route 22, clothes torn, covered in scratches. They asked what happened, but all he could say was, "I took a wrong turn." He never mentioned the figure, never mentioned the hanging bodies, never told anyone about the thing that had followed him out of the woods. Weeks later, when the Jeep was towed to a local junkyard, the mechanic who inspected it found something strange. On the inside of the back window, written in condensation, were 3 words, "See you soon." Story the end. The rain had been relentless all afternoon, turning the winding back roads of eastern Kentucky into a slick, reflective maze. Josh squinted through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the wipers slapped back and forth. He'd been driving since noon, leaving Lexington behind and heading toward his uncle's cabin in the foothills of the Appalachians. The GPS signal had gone out nearly an hour ago, leaving him to navigate by memory and a fading paper map. The sky was darkening fast, even though it was only early evening, and the trees pressed close to the road, forming a tunnel that swallowed his headlights. He had taken a turn he didn't remember taking, following a side road that promised a shortcut. The asphalt had narrowed, cracks splitting it in strange patterns, and in some places roots had pushed through, forcing him to swerve. "What am I doing?" he muttered aloud. "Just follow the damn map, Josh." The silence of the forest was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic patter of rain and the occasional squeal of tires. Occasionally, a shadow flickered across the road's edge, something small, maybe a deer. He tried to convince himself of that. Then he saw it, a wooden sign, leaning at a strange angle. The letters were weathered, barely legible. Stone Hollow, 5 miles. "Finally," he muttered. Relief and unease warred inside him. Small towns could be comforting, but something about the fog that hung low over the road and the way the trees seemed impossibly close felt wrong. He took the turn. The road twisted sharply, dropping slightly into a valley thick with mist. His headlights caught glimpses of broken fences and abandoned farm equipment half swallowed by undergrowth. As he descended, he began to notice something strange. The radio, which had been dead since the storm started, buzzed faintly. Static at first, then words. Josh, turn back. He slammed his hand over the knob, but the voice persisted, low, rasping, almost on the edge of comprehension. Just keep driving, he whispered to himself, heart thundering. Minutes passed. The road narrowed further, the forest growing dense. Then, through the fog, he saw lights. A faint yellow glow, maybe a gas station, maybe a porch light. He squinted. It was a town, or something pretending to be one. Stone Hollow. The street was empty. The buildings looked intact, but abandoned, their windows dark. There was no movement, no sound besides the rain. A diner's neon sign flickered weakly, Marty's Diner, buzzing intermittently. Josh slowed, searching for any sign of life. Finally, a gas station at the far end of the street. Its light flickered, and a faint hum of electricity leaked through the night. He parked and climbed out, the rain soaking through his jacket instantly. The pump handle was worn, rusted, but he tried it anyway. No fuel. Figures, he muttered. He looked up at the building. A door creaked open on its own. Faint light spilled onto the wet pavement. Josh hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was damp and musty. Shelves were lined with dusty cans and old newspapers. A bell chimed softly. From the shadows, a man emerged. Tall, thin, with deep-set eyes and skin that seemed too pale. His clothes were soaked, though the rain had let up outside. Evening, the man said, his voice low and raspy. Car trouble, Josh nodded. Ran out of gas. Pump's not working. Pump's old, the man said. You'll need the key. He reached under the counter, producing a small, rusted key. Number 3. Won't take plastic. Josh took the key, uneasy. Thanks. How far is the next town? The man's eyes darkened. Next town? Ain't one. Stone Hollow's all there is. Been that way since the floods. Josh swallowed. Floods? He nodded. Took the old road clean away. This thing left the hollow for good. Josh hesitated. Something about the man's gaze made him feel as if he were being measured, judged. He nodded and left, unlocking the pump and filling his tank. Once the car was full, he turned the engine over and pulled back onto the road. The mist was thicker now. The lights of the town seemed farther away than they should have been, and every time he passed a building, it felt as if he were being watched. He drove cautiously until he reached a bridge at the valley's edge. The wooden planks were slick, the railing broken in places. He crossed slowly, and halfway over, a figure appeared on the road ahead, a man, tall, leaning forward slightly. Josh slammed the brakes. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. His pulse was hammering. When he blinked, it was gone. He pressed on, heart racing. The road began to twist unnaturally, as if it were looping back on itself. The town lights appeared again, exactly where they had been moments before. He tried turning around, retracing his path, but every turn brought him back to the same street, same buildings, same flickering diner sign. His radio crackled. Turn back! Turn back! Josh screamed, pounding the wheel. He tried the ignition. The engine sputtered and died. The fog seemed to press closer, curling around the car, then movement at the edge of the trees. Dozens of figures, pale and thin, slowly advancing. Their faces were featureless, blurred, but they walked with deliberate steps. Josh scrambled out of the car, running blindly into the fog. The cold rain mixed with sweat as he stumbled, branches whipping his face. Behind him, whispers carried on the wind. His name repeated over and over. Hours or maybe minutes passed. He couldn't tell. The hollow seemed infinite, the same buildings appearing endlessly in the fog. Finally, he collapsed against a tree, exhausted. The whispers faded, replaced by the faint hum of a distant engine. When he opened his eyes again, it was daylight. The fog was gone, the trees back to normal, the road beneath him was clear asphalt. He stumbled to his car. It started. The town was gone, just the forest and the highway ahead. His phone buzzed. Signal restored. The GPS showed a clear route. Relief washed over him. He drove without stopping until he reached the next gas station in town, trembling and silent. When he asked the clerk about Stone Hollow, the man shook his head. Never heard of it. No town by that name for miles. Only the old hollow up in the hills, abandoned decades ago. Josh never took another back road. Years later, when friends joked about shortcuts, he'd smile and shake his head. Some places he realized were better left unvisited. Some roads better left untraveled. Sometimes at night, when the wind is just right, he swears he hears faint whispers calling his name, just on the edge of the rain. Story the end. The highway had been quiet for hours, stretching straight through the pine forests of northern Michigan. Jacob drove slowly, headlights cutting into the darkness, rain pattering steadily on the windshield. The GPS had stopped working miles ago, and the last rest stop had been abandoned, the sign swinging loosely in the wind. He hadn't meant to get lost. He'd taken a turn he thought was a shortcut, a back road connecting Route 72 to the town of Marlow. At first, it had been a pleasant drive, trees arching over the road, the smell of wet earth thick in the air, but now it felt like the forest was pressing in on all sides. Should have stayed on the main road, he muttered, mostly to himself. The road curved sharply, and Jacob swerved slightly to avoid a fallen branch. He barely caught it, heart-hammering. The rain had turned the asphalt slick. A second later, the headlights illuminated a wooden sign half buried in vines. "Welcome to Bracken's Hollow." He slowed, peering at the faded lettering. He'd never heard of the town. Bracken's Hollow? Weird name, he said aloud. The road narrowed further, curving between trees so close their branches scraped the roof of the car. The fog was thickening, rising from the ground like smoke. The air grew colder with every turn, and Jacob could see his breath in the beam of the headlights. After several minutes, he saw the first building, a dilapidated house with a porch sagging under the weight of moss. Its windows were dark and dirty, and the front door hung slightly ajar. He continued, thinking maybe the town would open up, but the houses kept appearing at random intervals, each more run-down than the last. The streetlights, if they existed, were either out or flickering, casting long, broken shadows. Jacob gripped the steering wheel tighter. His stomach churned. "This doesn't feel right," he whispered. Then he saw movement. A figure stood at the edge of the road, just beyond the headlights, tall, hunched, and completely still. Jacob slowed the car to a crawl. "Hello," he called out. The figure didn't move. He blinked. When he looked again, it had disappeared. He exhaled shakily. "Must have been a deer," he said, but the unease in his chest didn't ease. Minutes passed. The road curved sharply, and ahead, the town square came into view, or what looked like a town square. A gas station sat at the center, its pumps rusted and cracked. The neon sign flickered weakly. "Open." Jacob parked and stepped out, his shoes squishing in the mud. The building was empty, except for a faint smell of damp wood and something metallic, like rust or iron. He tried the door. Locked. He walked around the perimeter. The windows were dirty and cracked. A faint light flickered in the back rooms, but no one appeared to be inside. "Hello?" he called again, his voice trembling. A faint whisper carried through the air, almost drowned by the rain. "Leave." Jacob froze. His instincts screamed at him to run, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, pushed him closer. From the foggy edge of the street, another figure emerged. This one was smaller, a child maybe, standing perfectly still with its head tilted slightly. Its eyes were too wide, reflecting the weak neon light like mirrors. Jacob stumbled back, heart racing. The figure didn't move, but the feeling of being watched pressed down on him, suffocating and thick. He ran back to the car, slammed the door, and locked it. His hands shook on the wheel. "I need to get out of here," he whispered. The engine roared to life, and he turned onto the road, but the town seemed to have changed. The houses were closer now, the street narrower, and the fog thicker. Every turn felt wrong, every bend bringing him back toward the same square. The gas station appeared again, exactly the same. Jacob slammed on the brakes, panting. "No, no, no." The faint whispers grew louder. From the fog, multiple shapes began to emerge, figures of men, women, and children, all standing still, all watching. Their faces were pale and expressionless, some tilting unnaturally. Jacob tried to drive again, but the road twisted beneath him in impossible ways, looping back to the gas station over and over. The figures moved closer, shuffling silently across the road. One pressed a hand to the windshield. The glass fogged with their touch, leaving streaks that looked like black veins. Jacob screamed, jerking the wheel. The car skidded on wet mud, narrowly missing a tree. He floored it, tires spinning, heart hammering, vision blurred by rain and fear. The radio burst to life, static filling the car, then faintly a voice, almost indistinct. "You shouldn't have come." He didn't answer. He just drove. The fog thickened to a solid wall, and Jacob could no longer see the car's hood. Shapes pressed against the windows, faces so close he could see pale teeth, black eyes, expressions twisted in silent screams. He closed his eyes for a moment, willing himself to wake up, willing the nightmare to end. When he opened them again, the fog had thinned, the road straightened, and in the distance, the faint glow of Route 72 appeared. He didn't stop driving until he reached the next town, hair plastered to his forehead, hands raw from gripping the wheel. At a diner, he collapsed into a booth. The waitress poured him coffee, watching his shaking hands. "You okay, Han?" she asked. Jacob shook his head. I was driving near a town called Bracken's Hollow. It wasn't on any map, and there were people there, or things." The waitress paled. "Bracken's Hollow? That town doesn't exist. It was evacuated and burned decades ago. Flooding and forest fire took it out. No one's been there since." Jacob swallowed hard, voice trembling. I was there last night." She nodded slowly, eyes wide. "Then you took a wrong turn, and you found what's left, or what's left of it." Outside, fog began to creep along the highway, low and curling around the trees. Jacob stayed inside watching, knowing in his bones that some wrong turns never ended, that some roads didn't lead anywhere safe. Story the end. The sun had already set when Jason realized he was lost. What had started as a routine drive from Louisville to his cousin's cabin in Kentucky had turned into something else entirely. The GPS had gone out hours ago, leaving him navigating by memory and the occasional rusted sign he barely recognized. The road he was on now was a narrow, twisting lane flanked by dense woods. The trees leaned over the asphalt, their branches scratching at his windshield like claws. A light fog rolled across the ground, curling around the tires of his old sedan. Jason squinted at the dashboard clock. 10:47 p.m. He had missed an exit somewhere that didn't exist in his memory. The road curved sharply left, then right, then left again, each turn indistinguishable from the last. The radio was dead, all static, and his phone showed no service. A sign loomed ahead, tilted and partially covered in moss. Cedar Hollow, 3 miles. Jason frowned. He didn't remember seeing this on the map, but the night had grown too oppressive to debate directions. He turned toward the town. As he drove, the fog thickened. The trees pressed closer, and the air felt heavier, almost wet, like a storm was approaching, though the sky was clear. His headlights cut weakly through the gray haze. Somewhere ahead, a low sound echoed, maybe an animal, maybe nothing, but it sent a shiver down his spine. When he finally saw the town, it was nothing like he expected. Cedar Hollow looked abandoned, frozen in some past era. A few gas lamps flickered along the street, their orange glow flickering against broken windows and boarded-up buildings. The air smelled faintly of decay. Jason parked near a diner with a broken neon sign that flickered, open late. He thought perhaps someone inside could help him, or at least point him back to the main highway. The door creaked loudly when he pushed it open. Inside, the diner was empty. Chairs were tipped over, plates and cups left on tables as if everyone had left in a hurry. Dust hung thick in the air, motes dancing in the weak light from a single flickering bulb. "Hello?" Jason called, his voice sounding small and fragile in the emptiness. No answer. He stepped cautiously between the tables. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight. On the counter, a coffee pot sat cold, and a newspaper lay open, dated October 12th, 1985. Jason's stomach dropped. The building looked abandoned for decades, yet the table settings were oddly neat, almost staged. He heard it then, a soft, dragging sound coming from the kitchen in the back. A pause. A shuffle. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. "Leave." Jason spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. Only the fog outside pressed against the windows, moving like it had a life of its own. He bolted for the door and ran to his car, fumbling with the keys. The engine turned over, but the tires spun uselessly on the wet pavement. He tried again. Nothing. Panic surged through him as he looked around. The streetlights flickered and dimmed. From the corner of his vision, he saw movement, figures emerging from the fog. At first, he thought they were mannequins, the kind sometimes used in old storefronts, but they moved too fluidly. Children, adults, and elderly figures, all soaked, skin pallid and stretched tight. They stared at him with hollow eyes. Some had missing limbs. One of the children reached out, dragging its hand across the ground as it shuffled closer. Jason's mind raced. He remembered the bridge he had crossed earlier. He hadn't questioned it at the time, but now it seemed wrong. He had seen the creek below, black and still. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, spinning the tires. The car lurched forward, finally catching enough traction to move. He swerved past the figures, but the road ahead twisted impossibly. The trees bent inwards, fog closing around him like a thick curtain. He thought he heard whispers behind him, faint voices chanting, "Stay, stay." Jason didn't look back. He floored the gas, praying for a straight road, a clear path, anything. Minutes passed, or hours, he couldn't tell. The fog finally began to thin, revealing a road he recognized. Relief surged through him until he glanced at his side mirror. The figures were still there, standing in the fog along the edge of the road. He drove without stopping until he reached a gas station along the highway. The lights were bright, the air smelled of fresh coffee and gasoline, and humans were moving inside. Jason stumbled out of the car, breathing hard, shaking. The attendant looked at him, concern etched on his face. "Rough night?" Jason nodded mutely. "I got lost. Cedar Hollow." "Do you know it?" The attendant's face paled. "Cedar Hollow? That town's been underwater since the 80s. Flooded during a dam collapse. Ain't nothing left out there." Jason's knees went weak. "No, I was just there. I saw people. The attendant shook his head. "Son, you're lucky you're alive." Jason never drove back that way again. But sometimes when fog rolls in on a lonely country road, he swears he can hear faint dragging footsteps behind him and a voice whispering from the static of the radio, "Stay. Story. Story the end." It was supposed to be a simple drive. Mark had just left a friend's cabin in northern Pennsylvania, a late-night visit after a weekend hiking trip. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the moon barely cut through the fog that had begun to settle over the winding back roads. He wanted to get home before midnight, take the familiar route along Route 6, but a detour popped up on his GPS. The app suggested a shortcut through some unnamed roads, promising to save 15 minutes. At first, it seemed easy enough. The road was narrow but paved, flanked by thick woods. The mist clung to the treetops, rolling down into the road like smoke. Mark's headlights barely penetrated it. He tried to ignore the unease that prickled at the back of his neck, blaming it on the isolation. Minutes in, he realized something was off. The road had begun to twist unnaturally, curving in ways that didn't make sense. Every turn seemed to bring him back to the same patch of woods, a broken fence post, a gnarled oak, a pile of rocks. He had seen them before, just minutes earlier. The GPS kept insisting he drive forward, but the map showed only unmarked lines, a chaotic mesh of gray. He slowed, checking over his shoulder, but saw nothing. The fog had thickened, almost tactile, and the woods felt oppressive. Then, out of the mist, he noticed movement, a shape, tall and thin, standing by the side of the road. It didn't move, but he could feel it watching. "Probably just a deer," he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But the figure didn't resemble any deer he'd ever seen. Its limbs were too long, its posture wrong, and it didn't flee when the headlights swung toward it. Instead, it raised an arm slowly, deliberately, pointing in the direction of the road. Mark swallowed hard, panic gnawing at his chest. He tried to turn around, but the road looped unnaturally, curving back the way he'd come, as if the forest itself had shifted. He floored the gas pedal, heart hammering, but the car seemed to move slower than normal. Every sound, tires crunching gravel, the engine's hum, was muffled, distant. The first time he stopped the car, his hands shaking, he noticed the fog seemed thicker around the edges, curling against the vehicle like smoke from a fire. That's when he heard it, a whisper. Not loud, not clear, but just beyond comprehension. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing along the edge of the car. He dared a glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing. But when he looked through the side window, the figure had moved closer, emerging from the mist. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, elongated, shadowed, no features, just a void that seemed to suck in light. Mark's breath caught. He fumbled for his phone, only to see no service staring back at him. The GPS was frozen, the battery draining rapidly despite being fully charged just an hour ago. He tried the ignition again. The engine groaned, then died. The footsteps stopped. The air was still. And then, from the woods, he heard a sound that made his stomach drop, a low, guttural rasping, like the noise of wood bending and breaking, but alive. He panicked, yanking the door open and stumbling onto the road. Fog swirled around his legs, like soaking his pants in dampness. He ran blindly, branches scraping his arms, roots tripping him, the rasping following every step. He dared not look behind him. Finally, he broke through the edge of the mist and saw faint lights ahead. Street lights, the outline of a small town. Relief surged and he ran faster, collapsing into the middle of the road, waving at an approaching car. The driver slowed, startled as Mark scrambled into their headlights. The figure was gone. The driver, a middle-aged man in a pickup, gave him a bewildered look. "You okay, buddy?" Mark shook his head, voice trembling. Just take me somewhere safe." They drove slowly, cautiously, until Mark recognized Route 6. He kept glancing in the rearview, but the fog, the forest, the figure, everything had vanished. The next morning, he returned to try and find the road. He traced every turn, every path on the GPS, but it was gone. Satellite images showed only forest, dense and unbroken. No road, no detour, no sign of anything unusual. Months passed. Mark tried to forget it, but the memory haunted him. Sometimes when he drove at night, he swore he saw a figure in the distance, standing at the edge of the road, still pointing. Always silent, always watching. Once, at a gas station on the outskirts of town, he noticed scratches along the side of his car, long, deep, claw-like marks that hadn't been there before. No explanation, just a reminder. He stopped taking shortcuts. He stuck to well-lit roads, highways, and familiar routes. But sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the fog curling around him, the rasping following him, the figure standing silently, patient. He knew the truth. Some roads weren't meant to be driven at night. Some turns led you exactly where you weren't supposed to go, and once you took them, the forest remembered you. It waited. And Mark knew, deep down, that one night, someone else would make that same wrong turn, and the figure would be waiting. Always waiting. Story the end. The sun had already dipped below the horizon by the time Logan realized he had missed the turnoff for the cabin. He'd been driving for hours with his two friends, Vanessa and Derek, through the back roads of West Virginia, hoping to escape the city and spend a weekend away from work and school. The GPS had been acting strangely all afternoon, recalculating every few minutes, then eventually losing signal entirely. The deeper they drove into the mountains, the narrower and darker the roads became, the trees pressing close enough to make the headlights feel like a tiny island of safety in an ocean of shadow. "Seriously?" Vanessa said, her voice sharp with frustration. "We were supposed to turn 5 miles ago." I know, Logan said, rubbing his forehead. "GPS says to make a right up ahead, so let's just keep going a bit. There has to be another road sign." Derek frowned, leaning against the passenger side window. "I don't like this. We haven't seen another car in over an hour. Are we even still in the right county?" The road narrowed further, the pavement cracked and worn, with roots snaking up from the edges and disappearing under fallen leaves. Every so often, the fog that had rolled in earlier thickened around them, reducing the headlights to a dull glow that barely illuminated the next few feet of asphalt. "Why does this road even exist?" Vanessa muttered. "It's like it's been abandoned for decades." "Probably has been," Derek said, his voice low. "Some of these roads around here were built ages ago for logging or mining. They don't really maintain them." Logan slowed the car as the road curved sharply around a dense stand of trees. The headlights caught something just ahead, a wooden sign, leaning badly to one side, its paint peeling. Logan squinted. "Old Mill Road," he read aloud. "That doesn't sound too bad. Just a local back road." Vanessa's eyebrows drew together. "It doesn't look safe, and there's nobody else on this road. Not a soul." Logan shook his head. "We'll be fine. Let's just follow it for a few miles and see if it connects to the main highway." He turned onto Old Mill Road, and immediately the air seemed to change. The fog thickened, curling around the car like smoke. The trees on either side loomed closer, casting long shadows in the headlights. The road itself was barely wide enough for one car, and the branches scraped along the roof as they drove. After a few minutes, they passed a small creek. The wooden bridge over it groaned under the car, and the headlights revealed deep gouges in the wood. Logan hit the accelerator slightly, anxious to cross it quickly, but the car jolted violently as a plank cracked under the tires. "Jesus," Derek muttered, "that was close." Vanessa shivered. "Can we just turn around? This feels wrong." Logan swallowed hard. "I think we're fine. Just a few more miles." The road curved again, and a dilapidated farmhouse appeared through the fog. Its paint was long gone, the windows shattered, and the roof sagged as though weighed down by time itself. The porch creaked in the wind, or maybe it wasn't the wind at all. Vanessa pointed. "Look, someone's there." Logan turned, squinting through the fog. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure in the window, watching them. Then it vanished. "Probably just a trick of the light," he said, though his voice didn't carry conviction. They passed the house, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Every few seconds, Logan thought he glimpsed movement in the trees, something just beyond the edge of the headlights. Minutes later, the road split. There was no sign, no marker, just two dirt paths leading deeper into the forest. Logan hesitated. "Which way?" Vanessa asked, panic creeping into her voice. I think right," Derek said. "Something about the left path feels wrong." Logan nodded and turned right. The gravel gave way to mud, and soon the tires were sinking slightly with every turn. The fog grew thicker, almost suffocating, and a cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint sounds that could have been whispers, or the wind itself. Then they saw the diner. It sat at a bend in the road, glowing dimly through the fog. The neon sign flickered weakly. Riverside Diner. Logan's heart leapt with relief. "Finally," he breathed. "Someone. Anyone." They pulled into the cracked parking lot. The diner was empty, the door swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, everything looked normal. Tables set, a coffee pot steaming on the counter, a jukebox humming a faint tune. A middle-aged man stood behind the counter, polishing a glass. "Hello," Logan said. "We got a little lost out there. Can you tell us how to get back to Route 33? The man didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm, almost too calm. "Route 33? You're already past it. Been a long time since anyone came this way." "What do you mean?" Derek asked, frowning. The man smiled faintly. "Roads change. Sometimes they close themselves off. Sometimes they wait for travelers like you." Logan felt a chill creep up his spine. "Wait? What do you mean, wait?" The man's face shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the features were melting, then solidifying again. "Best stay a while. Roads aren't safe after dark." Vanessa grabbed Logan's arm. "We shouldn't be here. Come on." Logan nodded, and they hurried back to the car. But when they stepped outside, the diner was gone. The fog had swallowed it completely. The car, too, was barely visible, shrouded in white mist. He stumbled to the vehicle, finally finding the door and unlocking it. The headlights flickered on, and for a moment, he saw movement in the rearview mirror, a shadow following them along the road. They drove, faster now, tires slipping on the mud. Every bend in the road seemed to loop back on itself. Every mile forward felt like they were being pulled back. Then they saw it again. The farmhouse, closer than before, though they had passed it at least 10 minutes earlier. A shadow moved in the window, taller and more distorted than any human. "Logan!" Vanessa screamed. "It's coming after us." Derek slammed his hands on the dashboard. "We need to get out of here. Just drive!" The car skidded around another bend, and suddenly the road ended at a cliff overlooking a black void. The headlights illuminated only fog and twisted trees below. Logan slammed on the brakes, but the car slipped slightly toward the edge. He threw it into reverse, heart hammering, but the vehicle seemed to move slower than it should, as if the fog itself resisted them. They were trapped. From the corner of his eye, Logan saw movement among the trees along the edge of the road. Figures emerged, tall, thin, walking in jerky, unnatural motions. Their faces were pale, almost featureless, with hollow eyes that reflected the headlights. One stepped forward, and Logan could swear it was wearing Derek's jacket. Another, Vanessa's hoodie. He screamed and threw the car into drive. Tires squealed, mud flying. The figures disappeared, but the sense of being watched never left. Every time he slowed, they reappeared at the edge of the fog, closer, moving faster than any human could. Hours, or maybe minutes later, Logan found himself back on a wide, familiar highway. Rain poured down, but it was real now, ordinary, with the sound of cars and traffic. He slammed the brakes on the shoulder. Vanessa was trembling, Derek pale and silent. All the electronics in the car worked again, phones powered on, GPS blinking. But when Logan asked if they saw the shadows, both shook their heads. They never spoke of Ashwood Hollow again. A week later, Logan drove by the same area during daylight. The road that had swallowed them, Old Mill Road, was completely overgrown. No signs, no diner, no farmhouse, nothing but trees and fog rolling down the mountainside. Sometimes when the fog rolls in, Logan swears he hears whispers calling his name, and the faint crunch of footsteps on a dirt road just beyond the tree line. He never drives that way again. Story the end. It was a Friday evening when Kyle and his friends, Jenna and Matt, decided to drive from their college town in Ohio to a small cabin rental tucked deep in the Allegheny National Forest. The plan was simple: escape the city for a weekend of hiking, drinking, and storytelling by the fire. They had done similar trips before, but this one felt different. There was a chill in the air that no sweater could chase away. The first few hours were uneventful. They took the highway north, listening to music, joking about the upcoming weekend. As they approached the forested areas, the road narrowed, streetlights disappeared, and the landscape turned into a shadowed tunnel of trees. Kyle, who was driving, glanced at the GPS. "This is weird," he said. "The GPS says we should take a right up here, but it's just nothing. No road." Jenna squinted through the windshield. "It looks like a path, maybe dirt. You think it's safe?" Matt, who had been quietly scrolling through his phone, looked up. "The cabin's off-grid, remember? The listing said it's accessible via unpaved forest roads. Probably this is it." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's try it." They turned onto a narrow dirt track. Immediately, the trees pressed close to the car, and shadows clung to the edges of their headlights. The road twisted sharply, dipping into hollows and climbing steep inclines that made the tires groan. Soon, they realized the GPS had completely lost signal. "Great," Jenna muttered. "We're lost already." "It's just temporary," Kyle said, trying to keep calm. "We're still on the right track." The forest seemed to grow darker by the minute. Fog rolled in, thick and wet, curling across the road like smoke. Every now and then a branch would scrape against the roof, even though there were no overhanging limbs close enough to reach the car. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered suddenly. "Hear what?" Matt asked. A faint scraping, like nails dragged across metal, echoed through the fog around them. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Kyle shook his head. "Probably just a fallen branch. This place is creepy, but we're fine." Minutes passed, and the sound intensified. The car's engine began to sputter, coughing and stuttering over the uneven dirt. Kyle slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the vehicle jolted forward. But then the headlights flickered. In the brief darkness, a shadow flashed across the road. "What the hell was that?" Jenna gasped. Kyle stopped the car abruptly. They sat in tense silence, listening. The forest was alive with distant noises, cracking branches, faint whispers, a soft, dragging sound that seemed to circle the vehicle. Matt held his phone up, trying to get service, but the screen read no signal. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Let's just walk. There's bound to be a clearing or something." They opened the doors and stepped out. The fog was suffocating, clinging to their clothes and hair. The forest seemed endless in every direction, trees stretching so densely that no moonlight reached the ground. The dirt path they had driven on disappeared into the mist, leaving them disoriented. Then they saw it. Footprints in the soft earth. Human footprints, but irregular, too long, too thin, and unnaturally spaced. They led deeper into the fog. "Who would be out here?" Jenna whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "I don't know," Kyle said, "but we need to stay together." They followed the footprints for what felt like hours. The forest twisted unnaturally, paths doubling back on themselves, trees appearing where there had been open space just moments before. The whispers grew louder, soft words in a language none of them recognized, echoing around them. Suddenly, a shape emerged through the fog. A figure hunched, wearing tattered clothes, head cocked to one side. Its movements were jerky, almost broken, like a marionette with missing strings. "Back to the car!" Kyle shouted. They ran blindly, branches whipping their faces, roots tangling their feet. But when they reached where the SUV should have been, it was gone. "Where? Where's the car?" Matt stammered. Jenna pointed ahead, but all they saw was a small clearing with an old, abandoned house. The windows were dark, yet faint shadows moved inside. The front door creaked open, then slammed shut by itself. The whispers intensified, now chanting a single word in low, guttural tones: "Stay." Against their better judgment they approached, desperate for shelter. The air was icy, and the fog thickened around the house. Every step toward it felt heavier, as if the ground itself was resisting them. Inside, the floorboards groaned under their weight, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist along the walls. A sudden slam of a door behind them made them spin around. No one was there. Then, from the corner of the room, figures emerged, thin, faceless, their heads tilted unnaturally. They didn't walk, they floated, hovering above the floor. The chanting became deafening. Kyle grabbed Jenna and Matt, trying to escape, but the hallways twisted impossibly. Every door led to another identical hallway. The shadows closed in, surrounding them, whispering their names. Desperation pushed them forward until they found a staircase leading down into darkness. With no other option, they descended. The basement smelled of damp earth and decay. Old furniture and broken objects littered the floor, but what drew their attention was the far wall, a large mirror, cracked but intact. Their reflections stared back, but not as they were. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, and behind them the shadows loomed, reaching forward. Panic set in. Kyle smashed the mirror with a nearby chair. The glass shattered with a deafening crash. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the basement door slammed shut. They were trapped. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt meaningless. The whispers never stopped. The shadows edged closer, leaning over them, the temperature dropping until it felt as if their bones were freezing. Eventually, Kyle noticed a faint light coming from a crack in the wall. They forced their way through and emerged into the foggy forest again. The SUV was there, just as they had left it. No damage, no indication of the horrors inside the house. They jumped in and drove, never slowing down. The fog clung to the edges of the headlights, and sometimes Kyle swore he saw figures standing in the trees, watching them go. By the time they reached the highway and cell service returned, none of them spoke. Back in town, they tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, stress, fog-induced hallucinations. But weeks later, Kyle couldn't shake the memory of the whispers, the faceless figures, the house that didn't belong. Sometimes, driving home late at night on country roads, he saw a shadow at the edge of the headlights, just beyond the tree line. A figure, head tilted, waiting for someone to take the wrong turn. No one else would ever see it, and no one would believe him. But Kyle knew the forest never forgot. It waited. Story, the end. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy and still, the kind of night where even the smallest sound seemed amplified. Mark had been driving for hours, trying to make it back home after a late business meeting in a small town in upstate New York. He was exhausted, the long stretches of highway blurring together beneath the headlights of his sedan. The GPS had been his faithful companion all evening, guiding him along the dark, winding roads, but a sudden loss of signal had thrown everything off. The screen flickered, then went completely black, leaving only the sound of the engine and the faint hum of the tires against the asphalt. He cursed under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter, the empty darkness outside pressing in on him from all sides. Mark remembered the fork in the road that had appeared just minutes earlier. He had missed a sign, the kind that would have told him to turn left, and instinctively, he'd gone right. Now the roads stretched endlessly, flanked by thick woods that blocked the moonlight and swallowed his headlights in darkness. The trees were unnervingly still, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky as if they were alive, watching him. The silence was absolute, except for the occasional creak of a branch, the faint rustle of leaves, or the distant hoot of an owl. But something about it felt wrong, like the night itself was holding its breath. The road began to narrow, the asphalt cracking and breaking under the weight of time. A cold wind swept through the trees, rattling the car doors and causing a shiver to run down his spine. He tried calling someone, anyone, but his phone displayed nothing but no service. Panic started to gnaw at the edges of his mind. He had been on roads like this before, during camping trips in his college days, but something was different tonight. The woods seemed alive, and the shadows seemed to move just beyond his headlights. As he drove, Mark noticed a faint light ahead. At first, he thought it was another car, but the glow was too steady, too dim. As he got closer, he saw a small weathered sign beside the road. It read, "Old Mill Road, Dead End." His heart skipped a beat. The GPS had been right. He had taken a wrong turn, and there was no easy way back. Reluctantly, he decided to turn around, but as he searched for a suitable place, he realized the road had become even narrower, hemmed in by trees that seemed to close in on him. He tried to reverse, but the ground was soft, and the tires began to sink into the mud. Then he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, He thought it was a hiker, someone stranded like him. But the figure didn't move, didn't wave, or call out. It just stood there, perfectly still. Mark's instincts screamed at him to drive around, but as he slowly eased the car forward, the figure lifted its head. Even from a distance, he could see its face, or rather, the absence of one. It was pale, too pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. The figure raised a hand, and Mark felt an instinctive dread, the kind that settles deep in your chest. His foot slammed on the gas, tires spinning as he barely avoided the apparition. The car skidded off the road and into the woods. Branches tore at the paint, the headlights flickering as he struggled to get back onto the narrow path. Heart racing, breath coming in short gasps, Mark pushed forward, hoping to find some sign of civilization. But the road twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself in ways that didn't make sense. Every time he thought he recognized a landmark, it was gone, replaced by more trees, more darkness, more shadows that seemed to shift in his peripheral vision. Minutes turned into an hour, or maybe more. He had lost all sense of time. The headlights caught glimpses of movement, shapes that looked human but were impossibly thin, impossibly tall, darting between the trees. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, the stress and exhaustion playing tricks on him. But then he heard the sound, a faint whispering voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Turn back. He slammed the brakes, heart pounding, and spun around, trying to locate the source. The voice stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence so thick it felt like it pressed against his skull. In the dim glow of the dashboard, he saw something move outside the car window. He froze, staring at the edge of the woods where a figure, no, multiple figures, emerged. Their faces were obscured, but their presence was undeniable. They didn't walk. They glided, silent and deliberate, following the car with a patient, inexorable motion. Mark's hands shook as he tried to start the car again. The engine roared to life, and he tore down the path, praying it would lead him somewhere, anywhere. The figures moved with him, keeping pace effortlessly, never faltering. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but it was a corridor of shadow, the trees bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. The road seemed to stretch on forever, an endless loop of twisted trees and shifting shadows. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. The world outside the windshield became a surreal nightmare. Fog began to rise from the ground, thick and clinging, swirling around the car. Shapes moved within the fog, distorted and grotesque, whispering his name. The voice came again, closer this time. You shouldn't be here. Mark's mind was fraying. He tried to remember the way back to the highway, to safety, but every turn led him deeper into the forest. Every time he thought he saw the lights of a distant town, they vanished as soon as he approached. Exhausted, he finally pulled the car to the side of the road, hoping to rest to gather some semblance of sanity. As he sat there, shivering, he heard a faint tapping at the window. He jumped, heart hammering, and looked out. A small figure, maybe a child, pressed its face against the glass. Its eyes were too dark, too hollow, and it smiled in a way that made his stomach churn. He slammed the door locked and tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't turn over. The fog thickened, enveloping the car in a suffocating blanket of white. Mark's breathing grew frantic. He had to get out. He had to move. Ignoring the fear clawing at his chest, he jumped out of the car and ran. The ground was wet, the mud sucking at his shoes. The trees seemed to bend toward him, branches grabbing at his jacket, his hair, his arms. Behind him he could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling him, closing in. He didn't dare look back. He ran blindly, crashing through underbrush and tangled roots until he stumbled into a clearing. In the faint light, he saw a house, or what looked like a house. It was old, abandoned, and utterly silent, with windows like black eyes staring back at him. Desperation overrode fear, and he ran toward it, hoping to find a phone, a car, anything. The door creaked open under his hand, revealing a dusty interior, empty except for shadows that seemed to move in the corners of the room. Mark heard it then, a whisper from above, soft and intimate, calling his name. He froze. The voice was familiar, yet impossible. Slowly he climbed the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The second floor was a long hallway, lined with doors that were all slightly ajar. One door at the far end radiated a darkness that made his skin crawl. Against every instinct, he walked toward it. Inside, the room was empty, except for a mirror. And in the mirror, he saw himself, but not really himself. The reflection smiled when he didn't. It moved independently, gesturing for him to step closer. Heart hammering, he stumbled back, but the figure in the mirror stepped out of the glass into the room, its movements fluid and unnatural. The smell of decay hit him, choking and suffocating. Mark ran. He didn't look back. He burst out of the house and into the fog, screaming for help. But the forest had changed. The trees were taller, closer, their shadows deeper. The figures returned, surrounding him now, whispering, laughing, echoing his own panic. Every direction led him deeper into the nightmare, the wrong turn multiplying into a labyrinth of shadows and fear. Somewhere, far off, he heard the faint sound of a highway. Clinging to hope, he ran toward it, crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his face and arms. But as he emerged, the highway was gone, replaced by more trees, more shadows, more whispering voices that seemed to come from inside his own head. Mark's body gave out. He collapsed to the ground, gasping, and the figures closed in. He could see their faces now, pale, hollow, and grinning with a hunger that was unearthly. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night. One of them reached for him, its fingers icy and unreal, passing through his jacket as if he were already part of this haunted place. Time lost all meaning. Mark wandered, stumbled, and fell repeatedly. Each attempt to escape met with more confusion, more terror. The trees shifted, the road twisted, the fog thickened, and the voices never stopped, calling him, mocking him, dragging him further from reality. Eventually, he found himself back at the fork, the very one he had missed hours ago. The wrong turn was still there, waiting, the sign worn and faded, reading, Old Mill Road, Dead End. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had been moving in circles all along. Every choice, every turn, every desperate attempt to escape had led him right back to the beginning. The road was endless, the forest infinite, the night eternal. Mark sank to his knees, the figures gathering around him in silence, their hollow eyes boring into his soul. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying with it faint laughter, distant and cruel. He knew he would never leave, never find the highway, never see the lights of a town again. The wrong turn had claimed him, and the forest whispered his name, welcoming him into its unending darkness. Hours, days, maybe years later, he would never know, the forest remained unchanged. Travelers occasionally glimpsed a car stranded on a cracked, narrow road. Some claimed to hear whispers in the trees, faint voices calling their names. And if anyone ever tried to follow the road to safety, they would find themselves lost in the same looping nightmare, the wrong turn waiting, patient and eternal, for the next unwary soul. Story the end. The rain had been relentless all evening, pounding the windshield and drumming against the roof of Chris's pickup truck as he navigated the backroads of rural Maine. He had left his friend's cabin after a weekend of fishing and beers, thinking he could cut across a network of smaller roads to reach the interstate faster. His phone had been dead since leaving the main highway, and the GPS flickered intermittently, giving him directions that seemed wrong even as he followed them. He ignored the growing sense of unease, convincing himself that it was just the storm, the isolation, and his fatigue. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for his truck, flanked by thick forests whose trees leaned inward, their branches lashing in the wind. The fog that rose from the wet ground seemed almost alive, curling across the road in thick tendrils, obscuring everything more than a few feet ahead. As he drove, Chris noticed a sign that looked older than the pavement itself, half rotted and barely legible. It read, Red Hollow Road, Dead End. He frowned. It wasn't on the map. Maybe it was an old logging route. He considered turning back, but the map suggested a shortcut to the highway that would shave at least 30 minutes off his trip. He took the turn. Almost immediately, the road deteriorated. Potholes and ruts jostled the truck, and mud began to cling to the tires, making traction difficult. The rain hammered harder, and the windshield wipers struggled against the downpour. He drove cautiously, but a sudden flash of movement in the trees made him slam on the brakes. Something or someone stood just beyond the tree line, too pale to be anything he recognized, staring with eyes that seemed to catch the dim light of the truck. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. Chris shook his head and told himself it was a trick of the rain and shadows, but the feeling of being watched settled deep in his chest. The road twisted unnaturally, as if the forest itself was reshaping around him. Each time he thought he had made progress, the same bend would reappear, the same gnarled tree jutting into the road. His heart raced as he realized he was going in circles. The rain intensified, turning the dirt into a slick, slippery surface. The headlights briefly illuminated something on the road ahead. A figure kneeling in the mud, hunched over, head down. Chris's stomach lurched and he swerved to avoid it. But the figure wasn't human. Its limbs were elongated, twisted, and wet with rain, its face hidden in darkness. Chris sped up, tires skidding as he tried to leave whatever that thing was behind. The whispering started then, faint at first, almost inaudible over the rain. "Turn back. You shouldn't be here." It was all around him, as if the forest itself was speaking. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the truck bouncing violently over roots and ruts. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw more figures emerging from the woods, tall, thin shapes gliding through the mud and puddles without leaving tracks. Their eyes, pale and empty, reflected the headlights like lanterns in the storm. The road ended suddenly, or at least it seemed to. A fallen tree blocked the path, its trunk massive, slick with rain. Chris swore and slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning. That's when he noticed the ground beneath the tree wasn't solid. It was soft, as though the mud itself was moving. A hand, pale and thin, emerged, clawing at the roots. Another followed. Chris's chest tightened with fear. He could hear them whispering his name now, voices layered together, coming from all directions. He tried to start the truck again, the engine coughing before it roared to life. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, or what he thought was the road ahead. The forest had changed. Trees had moved, the road bent unnaturally, and the mist had thickened into a wall of white that obscured everything. The figures were closer now, their movements jerky but deliberate. Chris floored the accelerator, trying to push through, but the tires sank into the mud. The truck tilted dangerously to one side, and he had to fight to keep from tipping completely. The whispering grew louder, almost screaming now. "You belong here." Panic gripped him, and he abandoned the truck. He ran blindly through the mud and trees, branches slapping his face, roots tangling his feet. The forest seemed endless, each turn bringing him back to the same clearing, the same fallen tree, the same twisted shapes emerging from the fog. He tripped and fell, scraping his hands and knees, but kept running, adrenaline driving him forward. Eventually, he stumbled into an abandoned cabin, small and weathered, its roof sagging. Smoke curled from a rusted chimney, though no fire could be seen. He slammed the door and barricaded it with a broken chair, trying to catch his breath. The interior was dim, filled with the smell of mold and decay. On the walls hung photographs, yellowed with age, of families smiling in front of houses and cabins, their eyes darkened, hollowed out, or scratched over. Something in the room shifted, a shadow that didn't belong to him. He turned, flashlight shaking, and saw a figure standing in the corner. It was human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, limbs twisted, and skin pale, glistening as though wet. It tilted its head, staring at him with eyes that seemed to pierce into his skull. Chris screamed and backed toward the door, but it was too late. More figures emerged from the darkness, filling the corners, the doorway, and even the ceiling, all whispering his name in unison. He slammed the door shut and pressed his back against it, heart pounding, chest heaving. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Chris had no sense of time. He could hear the figures pacing outside, their whispers forming a chant, echoing in his mind. Sleep came briefly, and in that brief unconsciousness, he dreamt of the road, the wrong turn, the hanging shapes, and the endless fog. When he woke, he was no longer alone. A single figure knelt beside him, its head tilted, mouth stretching into a smile that was far too wide. It whispered, "You can't leave." Chris bolted for the door, crashing into the dark forest once again. Every path led him back to the same place. The fallen tree, the twisted figures, the fog thick as smoke. Exhaustion set in. His lungs burned, his legs ached, and the rain soaked him to the bone. The forest's whispers grew louder, more insistent, wrapping around him, suffocating him. Eventually, he collapsed in the mud, the shapes closing in, their pale eyes staring down at him. Their whispers filled his mind, repeating, looping, "Turn back. You shouldn't be here." The sky darkened even further, though it had been night for hours already, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Somewhere far away, a faint glow appeared. A distant road, a hint of civilization. Chris crawled toward it, every ounce of strength pushing him forward. But each step brought him only deeper into the fog. The figures hovered, gliding silently, always just beyond reach, surrounding him, closing in. When the first morning light finally broke through the trees, the highway crews found the truck abandoned at the edge of the forest. Mud caked the tires, windshield cracked from branches, engine still warm. Chris was gone. No tracks led into the woods, no sign of a struggle, nothing but the faint echo of whispering in the trees. Locals spoke of Red Hollow Road in hushed tones. They said travelers sometimes vanish after taking the wrong turn, only to be seen later in fleeting glimpses through fog, pale, silent figures watching from the woods, whispering to anyone who dares pass. The forest waits, patient, for the next person to stray from the safe path. Story the end. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, slicking the highway into a mirror of darkness. Tom had left Indianapolis late, hoping to reach his brother's cabin in West Virginia before the storm got worse. But as the night grew deeper, the interstate thinned until he was the only car for miles, headlights slicing through a curtain of wet fog. His GPS had been glitching for the past half hour, flipping between blank screens and distorted maps. When a yellow detour sign appeared almost out of nowhere, its letters peeling, warning of a route closed ahead, he cursed but turned anyway, hoping it would reconnect him to the main road. Immediately, the asphalt narrowed, cracked with potholes, bordered by dense forest on both sides. The trees seemed to bend over the road, blocking what little moonlight there was. The fog swirled unnaturally around the beams of his headlights, making shadows twist and sway. Tom shook his head. He'd driven in remote areas before, but this felt different, silent, unnatural. The first wrong turn came faster than he realized. The detour road split into two paths, neither marked. Tom hesitated. The left road appeared flatter, though the edges were choked with brush. The right road sloped sharply downward into a fog-filled hollow. Against his better judgment, he turned right. Almost immediately, the car slid in the mud. His tires struggled for traction, and the headlights caught on something at the side of the road. A sign, weathered and broken, leaning into the undergrowth. The word etched into the wood made his stomach twist. "Stop!" He laughed nervously. "Very helpful." He shook his head and pressed the accelerator. The road twisted violently, and the trees closed in, so thick he could barely see the sky. A branch scraped against the windshield, startling him, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a figure standing among the trees, pale and motionless. When he blinked, it was gone. Time began to lose meaning. Every turn led to another fork. The GPS remained blank. The fog thickened, rolling across the windshield in waves, as if alive. Tom realized he had no idea which direction was correct, and the sense of isolation gnawed at him. He tried calling his brother, but there was no signal. The radio crackled with static, and through it, faint, indecipherable whispering seemed to echo, though he was alone. Minutes or hours later, he spotted a dim light in the distance. Relief washed over him. He drove toward it, hoping for a house, a gas station, anything. As he got closer, he realized it was a small gas station, abandoned, windows dark and grimy, pumps rusted and crooked. But the light flickered from inside the building, yellow and uneven, as though someone or something was moving around. Tom's chest tightened. He was tired, hungry, and soaked from the rain. Against his gut instinct, he parked and approached. A door creaked as if pushed by an invisible hand. His reflection shimmered in the glass, pale and tense. Inside, the air was cold, musty, and smelled faintly of decay. The light flickered from a single candle in the corner. The shelves were empty, save for cobwebs and dust. A sound upstairs made him freeze. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Nothing human about the rhythm. Tom strained his ears, heart hammering. The steps stopped, and the candlelight flickered violently. A shadow stretched across the wall, tall, thin, and impossibly distorted. He wanted to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him. A voice, low and guttural, whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't be here." Tom bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The candle sputtered, casting moving shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. He turned toward the stairs. The shadow had risen, now moving downward with unnatural fluidity. It had no face, just an empty void where eyes should have been, but he felt it staring, following, intending. Panic surged. Tom backed away, tripping over debris, scraping his hands along the floor. He found a broken window and clawed at it, breaking the glass and squeezing through. Rain hit him like a hammer. He ran blindly into the trees, mud sucking at his shoes. The forest was alive, whispering, shifting around him. Every path he tried led him back to the clearing with the gas station. Then he saw more figures. They emerged slowly from the fog, pale, wet, featureless faces with hollow eyes, bodies twisted and long-limbed. They didn't walk. They glided, sliding silently across the mud. One lifted a hand pointing at him, and in unison, the whispering intensified. "Stay with us." Tom ran faster, heart slamming against his ribs. The fog thickened to a wall, blinding him, and the whispers became voices, echoing from every direction, overlapping, chanting, "Turn, turn, turn." He stumbled and fell. A cold, wet hand gripped his ankle, pulling him toward the earth. He kicked and screamed, finally breaking free and scrambling upright. The mist shifted, and ahead a small cabin appeared, bathed in candlelight. He didn't hesitate. Inside, the air was suffocating. The walls were lined with portraits of people, smiling, staring, but their eyes black voids. A figure sat in the corner, head bowed, dripping wet, hair covering the face. The candlelight flickered across its pale, twisted features. It lifted its head slowly. Tom's breath caught. The eyes were empty. "You're late," it said, voice like cracking wood. The candle went out. Darkness consumed everything. The whispering swelled into a roar. Shapes moved at the edge of Tom's vision, figures he couldn't fully see, clawing, pressing, watching. He felt them close, circling, their presence pressing against his skin, cold and heavy. He ran. Out the door, into the forest. The fog swallowed him, twisting paths, looping endlessly. Every step led him back to the same clearing. The gas station, the cabin. Figures everywhere. The rain had stopped, leaving an eerie silence. Finally, exhausted, he collapsed on the muddy road. He dared to look up and saw headlights in the distance. Another car, another human. Relief surged. The car slowed, and the driver rolled down the window. Tom ran toward it, shouting, waving his arms. The driver's face was familiar, but wrong. Features stretched unnaturally, eyes hollow and black, mouth curving into a grin that didn't belong. The car didn't stop. Tom screamed into the darkness as the forest closed in. Mist rolled over the road, swallowing him whole. When the local authorities investigated the next day, the road showed no sign of detour, gas station, or cabin. Tom's car was gone. Locals whispered of the hollow road, a place where travelers vanish in the fog, taken by the forest itself. Some said that if you drive late at night, you might see headlights flicker through the mist. If you stop, a figure may wave you in, smiling, hollow-eyed, waiting. And if you follow it, you are never seen again. Story the end. It was just past dusk when Marcus decided to take the old highway that cut through the Appalachian foothills. He had been driving for hours, and the GPS kept insisting he turn left onto a winding road that seemed barely wide enough for a single car. He had lived in the Midwest most of his life, and roads like this, narrow, twisted, and flanked by dense forest, felt alien and unnerving. But he was tired, eager to reach his Airbnb rental before night fully descended, so he convinced himself it was just a shortcut. The moment he turned, the atmosphere shifted. The headlights barely penetrated the thick canopy overhead, and the air inside the car felt heavier, almost damp, as if the surrounding trees themselves exhaled. Marcus tried to shake off the creeping unease, telling himself that he had driven in remote areas before. Yet, every so often, he caught glimpses of something moving in the corner of his eye, a shadow flickering just beyond the edge of his lights. He checked the GPS again, only to find that the road had disappeared from the map. The blue line that should have guided him through the forest had vanished, leaving a vague gray emptiness. Marcus's pulse quickened. He remembered seeing signs for Old Hollow Road just before the turn, but there were no signs now, only the endless black of trees pressing close. He rationalized that the GPS might be malfunctioning, or maybe the map was outdated. Still, a chill ran down his spine. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The road twisted sharply, narrow and uneven, with potholes that rattled his tires and made the car lurch unpredictably. The isolation was complete. No other vehicles, no lights, no sounds of civilization, just the occasional rustle of branches brushing against the car and the far-off calls of birds that had gone silent with the approaching night. The headlights caught glimpses of gnarled tree trunks that seemed to twist unnaturally, their shadows creating the illusion of figures slinking through the underbrush. Marcus's unease grew as the forest seemed to close in. He tried to turn back, but every turn led him deeper. The road branched multiple times, each path looking almost identical, shrouded in mist that had begun to rise from the forest floor. The GPS remained blank, and the faint radio signal crackling in the background was just static. He called out, half joking, "Hello? Anyone?" His voice seemed swallowed by the trees, leaving only silence. At one point, he noticed something strange. There was a wooden sign leaning precariously against a tree, carved with the word "Welcome," in letters so jagged they almost looked clawed. It didn't feel like a friendly greeting. Marcus's stomach twisted. The sign appeared too deliberately placed, and there were no other signs, no houses, nothing. Just forest. He kept driving, trying to ignore the growing tension that clawed at his chest. The road became worse. Patches of mud that slicked the tires, fallen branches that he had to swerve around, and an odd, sulfurous smell that seemed to hang in the air. The forest was unnervingly silent now. No wind, no animals, only the sound of the car's tires crunching against the earth. Then he saw it. A figure standing on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a trick of the headlights. The shape was thin, unnaturally tall, and completely still. Marcus slowed, squinting. The figure didn't move as he passed. He wanted to believe it was a scarecrow, but the proportions were wrong, almost grotesque, like a human distorted into something else. He felt his hands tighten around the wheel, a cold sweat forming on his forehead. He drove on, trying not to glance back, though curiosity gnawed at him. The road opened into a small clearing. In the dim glow of his headlights, he noticed an abandoned gas station. The windows were dark, cracked, and the pumps were rusted. Yet, on the side of the building, a faint flickering light pulsed, as if someone or something was inside. The kind of flicker that doesn't belong to a normal lamp. Marcus slowed, debating whether he should stop. Hunger, fatigue, and a creeping sense of curiosity urged him toward it, but fear held him back. Suddenly, a hand reached out from behind a pump, pale and slender, gripping the edge with long, dirty fingers. Marcus jerked the wheel, almost hitting a tree, and the car skidded to a stop. He slammed it into reverse, but the road seemed different now. Branches scratched against the car, low-hanging limbs that hadn't been there before. It was as if the forest had shifted while he wasn't looking, closing the path behind him. Marcus's heart pounded. He tried to follow what he thought was the original road, but the twists and turns had multiplied. Every direction looked the same. The mist thickened, curling around the car like fingers. He could see the dim glow of the gas station's flickering light ahead again, though he hadn't moved forward. It was impossible. Panic set in. He turned on the interior light, trying to steady his nerves. His reflection in the rearview mirror seemed wrong. For a moment, he thought he saw another face staring back, a shadow of his own, but with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. He blinked, and it was gone. The darkness pressed in again, heavier, almost tangible. He tried to start the car again, willing himself to think logically. If he could just find the main highway, he could escape. But the engine stalled. He turned the key repeatedly, the car groaning, refusing to respond. Then he heard it, a sound faint at first, like footsteps in the underbrush circling the vehicle. He spun around, but there was nothing. The trees seemed closer, the mist thicker, and the sound now echoed from all sides. Marcus remembered his phone. He pulled it out, praying for a signal. One single bar of service. He dialed 911, but the line was filled with static, and then a voice whispered, low and guttural, "Don't leave." His stomach dropped. The call disconnected. He was trapped. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Time lost meaning. The forest around him shifted subtly, almost alive, with shadows moving just beyond the headlights. Strange figures appeared and disappeared between trees. Tall, thin silhouettes with eyes that glowed faintly in the mist. They didn't move like humans, but slid, fluidly, unnaturally. Marcus wanted to scream, but he was paralyzed with fear, unable to distinguish reality from imagination. At one point, he saw a figure standing directly in the middle of the road, closer than any before. It was a man, or something resembling a man, draped in tattered clothing, face obscured by shadows. He raised a hand slowly, pointing at Marcus, and a whispering wind carried a faint phrase, "This way." Against his better judgment, Marcus followed. The road curved sharply, and the mist thickened until it felt like driving through clouds. Then the car emerged into another clearing. There was a house this time, a two-story farmhouse, seemingly abandoned, with windows dark and broken, yet a single window on the second floor flickered with candlelight. Desperation forced Marcus to stop, thinking he could find help, call someone, maybe just wait until morning. The house door creaked open before he could even touch it. No wind, no visible hand, just the slow, deliberate sound of hinges moving. Marcus froze, but something compelled him to step inside. The air was cold and musty, thick with the scent of decay and damp wood. Floorboards groaned under his weight. The candlelight flickered from the upper window, casting long shadows across the walls, twisting familiar objects into grotesque shapes. From upstairs came a sound, a soft, almost melodic humming. Marcus climbed the stairs slowly, each step a struggle against the dread crawling over his skin. The hallway was narrow, lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the corners. The humming grew louder, more insistent, almost hypnotic. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar. Light spilled out, warm and flickering, but with an unnatural hue. He peeked inside. The room was empty, except for a mirror leaning against the far wall. The humming stopped. Marcus's reflection stared back at him, at first normal. Then the reflection smiled, a slow, cruel curl of lips that Marcus had never made. Its eyes were black, hollow, and for a moment he felt it was alive, watching him, mocking him. He stumbled back, hitting the wall, heart hammering. The reflection reached out, hands pressing against the glass, though Marcus was certain it had no physical presence. He ran, down the stairs, through the house, out into the night. The forest had changed again. The trees now seemed twisted into shapes that resembled figures reaching toward him. The road was gone, replaced by a dense tangle of roots and mud. He could hear whispers now, low, collective, urging him to go deeper. Marcus ran blindly, desperate for anything that resembled a road. Hours, or maybe minutes, later, he stumbled into a clearing with headlights shining through mist. Relief surged. Another car was parked there, engine running. He ran toward it, waving frantically. The driver, a man in his 40s, startled, looked at him with wide eyes. Marcus tried to speak, but only guttural, broken words came out. Wrong. Turn. Forest. They. The man nodded slowly, as if he understood. You're lucky, he said quietly. Most don't come back from Old Hollow Road. He unlocked the passenger side and Marcus collapsed inside. As the car drove off, Marcus looked back at the forest. The mist shifted, and for a brief second, he thought he saw the farmhouse again. Candlelight flickering in the window. A shadow moved past the trees, watching, waiting. They didn't speak the rest of the way. The road ahead eventually widened, leading to the familiar highway. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that whatever haunted that forest had followed him, or worse, that it had marked him somehow. Even days later, the memory of the hollow figures, the distorted reflections, and the whispering wind stayed with him, creeping into the corners of his mind when he was alone, in the dark. No one believed him when he tried to explain. GPS logs showed nothing unusual. The forest was supposedly miles away from any known settlements, and Old Hollow Road appeared to be nothing more than an old logging trail. But Marcus knew the truth. He could feel it every night, in the quiet hum of his house, in the shadows stretching across his walls. The forest wasn't finished with him, and he feared, more than anything, that it never would be. Every so often, when he drives at night, he finds himself gripping the wheel tighter, scanning the sides of the road for movement. Sometimes, just out of the corner of his eye, he swears he sees the shadows again, tall, thin, slithering figures that vanish when looked at directly. He no longer takes shortcuts. He never wants to. The memory of that wrong turn, of the mist, of the whispering and the flickering candlelight, stays with him, a haunting reminder that some roads are never meant to be taken. He dreams of the forest, too. In sleep, he walks the twisting paths, lost in the mist, the whispering urging him onward. He wakes drenched in sweat, heart racing, and sometimes catches his reflection in the mirror, smiling back with eyes black as the night he nearly didn't leave. Marcus never told anyone where he went. Some things are too strange, too terrible to be believed. The memory of that night, of the road that wasn't on any map, of the flickering farmhouse and the whispering figures, remains with him. He knows the forest is still out there somewhere, waiting, watching, and he knows deep down that one day he might make another wrong turn. Story the end. It was nearing midnight when Mark and his friend Jason decided to take the long way home after a weekend camping trip in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. They had spent the day hiking a less traveled trail near a small creek, and though the sun had been shining when they started, the thickening clouds now swallowed what little light remained. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and a fine mist began settling over the forest, thus making the trees glisten like they had been polished. They were tired, muddy, and eager to get back to the warmth of Mark's old truck. But as they approached the road leading out of the forest, they discovered a fallen tree blocking the main path. Jason, the more impulsive of the two, suggested taking a narrow dirt road that veered off to the left. "It's probably some kind of logging road," he said, shrugging. "Might be a shortcut." Mark hesitated. He didn't recognize the road from the map, and there were no signs indicating where it led. He tried to voice his concern, but Jason was already climbing into the driver's seat. "Come on, it'll be fine. We're not far from the highway." The dirt road was overgrown, bordered by dense trees whose branches seemed to reach out toward the truck, as if trying to grab it. Every bump and rut made the vehicle lurch, and the headlights reflected off patches of fog, making the shadows dance in a way that felt almost sentient. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional snap of a twig under the tires. Even the usual sounds of night, crickets, owls, the distant call of coyotes, were absent. After 10 minutes of tense, slow driving, Jason muttered under his breath, "This doesn't look right. I think we passed a fork back there. Should we turn around?" Mark tried to get a bearing from his phone's GPS, but there was no signal. The screen flickered, then went black, as if drained by the surrounding darkness. They were alone, completely off the map, and the road ahead was narrowing, flanked by a wall of trees that made the headlights feel weak and useless. "I told you this was a shortcut," Jason said, trying to laugh, but it came out as a strained whisper. He didn't sound convinced. The road suddenly curved sharply and the truck skidded slightly on loose gravel. Mark noticed a faint, flickering light in the distance between the trees. "Do you see that?" he asked. Jason nodded, squinting. "Might be a cabin or something." As they approached, the light flickered again, and Mark thought he could make out shapes, tall, dark figures moving just beyond the glow. The road ended abruptly at what seemed like a clearing, but it wasn't a clearing in any conventional sense. The ground was uneven, overrun with weeds and dead leaves, and there were remnants of what might have been vehicles, their rusted frames half swallowed by the earth. The light they had seen was coming from a lantern hanging from a crooked post in the middle of the area. Around the lantern were carved wooden stakes, almost like crude markers, arranged in a rough circle. Jason stopped the truck. "This is weird," he said, swallowing hard. "We should just turn back." But the road behind them had disappeared, as if it had never existed. The trees seemed to close in, shadows forming shapes in the fog that resembled faces. Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. Before they could react, a sound broke the silence. The unmistakable creak of footsteps on dry leaves. Not running, not hurried, just slow, deliberate steps moving closer. "Hello?" Mark called, his voice cracking slightly. No answer. The lantern flickered violently, then dimmed to a ghostly glow, revealing figures standing at the edge of the clearing, thin, tall, with elongated limbs, their faces obscured by shadow. They didn't move in a way that seemed natural. Their bodies swayed slightly like trees in a strong wind, but the wind wasn't there. Jason fumbled with the truck keys, but the ignition wouldn't turn over. Panic surged, and he tried again. Nothing. The figures began to close in, gliding rather than walking, soundless. Mark could hear the faint hum of something low, almost like a whisper, just beyond comprehension. It wasn't words. It was a vibration in his chest, a resonance that made his teeth ache. One of the figures stepped forward. For a brief second, the lantern illuminated its face. It wasn't a face in any human sense. No eyes, no nose, only a void where features should be. Mark screamed, and the figure let out a high-pitched, keening sound that seemed to reverberate through the trees. Jason shoved the truck into gear, tires spinning on the uneven dirt, and they bolted down the path they thought they had come from. For what felt like hours, they drove blindly, the trees pressing closer, fog swallowing everything beyond the beam of their headlights. Shadows moved along the edge of the road, keeping pace with them. Occasionally, Mark would catch glimpses of more lanterns flickering in the distance, always at the edge of the fog, always watching. Then the truck hit a patch of mud, spinning out of control and skidding to a stop near an abandoned shack. Mark slammed the door and locked it, breathing hard. Jason, pale as a sheet, whispered, "We're trapped." The shack was small, maybe 10 feet by 12, with boarded-up windows and a low, sagging roof. Inside, it smelled of mold and decay, and the floor was littered with broken furniture and animal bones. The walls were scratched with symbols that looked like they had been carved by hand, jagged lines that made no sense. They waited, huddled together, listening. The footsteps returned, circling the shack, slow and methodical. The fog pressed against the walls, seeping through cracks, carrying with it a damp chill that made the air feel thick and heavy. Then a sound from above, a dragging, scraping sound like claws on wood. They dared not look. Hours passed. Minutes. Time became meaningless. Occasionally, the lanterns would appear through the cracks in the walls, hovering outside, moving closer with each flicker. Then, abruptly, silence. The air felt empty, the fog still. The oppressive weight lifted just enough for them to hear the distant sound of a car engine. Normal, human. Mark scrambled to the door and peered outside. A dirt road led away from the shack, winding through the trees. The fog had thinned, and the forest no longer felt alive in the same way. Jason got the truck working on the first try this time, and they drove without looking back. Hours later, they found themselves on a highway, miles from where they had entered the forest. The GPS kicked back on, though it showed a strange, unnamed area with no roads connecting it to anywhere. They drove in silence until dawn, both shaken but alive. Months passed. Mark tried to tell people about what happened, but friends, family, and even local authorities dismissed it as fear and exhaustion. There were no reports of missing hikers in the area. The road and clearing had vanished from the maps, satellite images, and even local lore. But every time Mark drove through dense forest or the sky turned a certain way at dusk, he felt it, the pull of that place, the sensation that something was always just beyond the edge of vision, waiting. Jason moved across the country soon after, unable to shake the feeling that the forest had marked him. Mark, however, stayed. He would sometimes hike alone, careful to stick to familiar trails, but the memory of that night never faded. Sometimes, while driving late at night on rural roads, he would see a flicker of light between the trees and hear a sound, a whisper, a footstep, the hum of something that resonated deep inside. And he knew, as surely as he knew the blood in his veins, that the forest had not forgotten him. Years later, Mark received a package at his apartment, a small, weathered lantern with a note inside. The note contained only one line, scratched hastily in jagged letters. "We are always watching." From that night on, every drive home felt wrong, every shadow seemed alive, and every time he closed his eyes, he could feel the soft, deliberate pressure of footsteps behind him. He never returned to the forest, but the forest returned to him, in glimpses of shadow at the edge of the road, in the hum of something vibrating just beyond hearing, in the faint glow of lanterns flickering at impossible distances. Even now, when the wind is right and the night is thick with fog, Mark swears he can hear them. The silent figures gliding just beyond the trees, moving with the patience of centuries, waiting for the moment when someone makes a wrong turn, even if it's only a step too far into the dark. Story the end. It was around 10 p.m. when Jenna realized she'd made a mistake. She had left her friend's house in upstate New York a little later than planned, thinking she could cut across the back roads to get home faster. The headlights of her old sedan carved paths through the thick darkness, illuminating the overgrown trees that crowded the narrow road. The map on her phone insisted she was on a shortcut, but the road was twisting, with sharp curves and barely any signage. Something about the way the shadows moved in the periphery of her vision made her stomach tighten. She laughed nervously, muttering to herself that she was being paranoid. The roads in the country were just like this, right? Narrow, deserted, lined with dense woods. But after the third curve, she noticed something odd. The road seemed to loop back on itself. She had passed a broken-down mailbox and a faintly lit sign with peeling paint before, and now there it was again. Same mailbox, same sign. She slowed the car, pressing her foot lightly against the brake, and tried to adjust the GPS, which stubbornly insisted she keep going straight. That's when she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the shoulder of the road. It was tall, unnaturally still, and entirely black against the darkness. Jenna squinted, trying to make sense of it. Her eyes darted around, but there was no movement in the trees, no reflection from the moon. She shook her head, muttering that it was probably just a tree stump or a scarecrow someone had left behind. She floored the gas pedal, trying to get past it, but the figure remained, seemingly watching her. The road twisted again, sharper this time, and she felt her tires skid slightly on loose gravel. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, and the quiet of the night felt oppressive. A mist began to rise from the ground, curling around the car, hiding the road ahead in a ghostly haze. She tried to call her friend, tried to use her GPS again, but there was no signal. Her phone displayed no service in stark white letters. She swallowed hard and glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. Relieved, she exhaled slowly, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. Every shadow seemed exaggerated, every rustle of leaves a threat. She passed a bend and noticed an old abandoned farmhouse off to the side, its windows dark and empty. She had driven past it countless times before, but something about the shape of it now seemed wrong, off, distorted in the darkness. The porch sagged at an angle that shouldn't have been possible, and the peeling paint looked almost like scars across its surface. She didn't want to look too long. Then the headlights caught something else. Tire tracks leading off the road into the woods. Deep, wide, fresh. And then, faint but unmistakable, footprints beside them. Bare footprints. They didn't look human. Too large, too long, almost like claws had left them. Her mind raced, and she pressed the accelerator, praying she'd reach the next town. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The GPS now refused to function at all, spinning aimlessly as if mocking her. The trees leaned closer, their branches scraping the roof of the car like skeletal fingers. She could hear the sound of something moving in the woods, something fast. A brush of leaves, a low thud, a snapping twig. She convinced herself it was just deer, or raccoons, anything natural. But the sound persisted, moving alongside her car, matching her turns, echoing in the mist. Then she saw it again. Another figure, or maybe the same one, from before. This time closer, emerging from the fog in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, tires squealing, but the figure didn't move, didn't react. Just stood there, impossibly still, and taller than any human she had ever seen. She tried to swerve, but the road was too narrow, the trees too close. Her car bumped against the edge of the dirt shoulder, and she fought to regain control. Suddenly the engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered and died, leaving her in complete darkness. She fumbled for the headlight switch, but the car didn't respond. Panic gripped her chest, sharp and tight. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, only to remember she had no signal. The fog thickened, curling in from the woods like it was alive, wrapping the car in a suffocating blanket. She tried the ignition again, but the engine groaned and refused to turn over. The figure was closer now. She could see it clearly, impossibly tall, elongated limbs moving in a way that no human could. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and there were no discernible facial features, just a shadow, a void. It raised an arm slowly, deliberately, pointing at her. Jenna's breath came in ragged gasps. She wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. The air seemed heavy, pressing against her chest, making each inhale painful. And then she noticed the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible, like leaves rustling, but more deliberate. They were words, murmured just beyond understanding, pulling at the edges of her mind. She covered her ears, rocking in the driver's seat, but they persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Her vision blurred, and the figure seemed to stretch taller, leaning over the car as if the darkness itself had taken form. In desperation, she yanked the door handle, flinging herself out of the car. Her feet hit the gravel shoulder, and she ran blindly into the fog, branches clawing at her arms, thorns tearing through her jacket. Behind her, she could hear it moving, soft, fluid, impossible footsteps that matched her own pace without faltering. She stumbled over a root, fell hard, scraping her knees, and when she looked back, it was there, just standing, watching, waiting. She ran until her lungs burned, until the mist seemed to thin slightly, revealing another road, wider, paved, with the faint glow of distant streetlights. She didn't stop until she saw a car approaching from the distance. She waved frantically, her voice breaking as she screamed for help. The headlights cut through the fog, and for a moment she thought she might be safe. But then she noticed the shadow that moved alongside the car, keeping pace. The driver slowed, confusion crossing his face as he saw her waving. Jenna ran toward him, but the shadow didn't move off the road. The moment she reached the vehicle, she turned to look again, and the shadow was gone. The driver looked at her, startled, as she tried to explain, but the words failed her. She was trembling uncontrollably, her mind reeling. Eventually, they got to a gas station in the nearest town. Jenna told the attendant her car had broken down and she called her friend. But when she looked back toward the road she had come from, there was nothing. No fog, no figure, not even tire tracks. Just a perfectly ordinary stretch of country road, quiet and empty. The next day, when she returned to try and find the road, it was gone. No signs of the shortcut, no abandoned farmhouse, nothing. Her GPS insisted she had always been on the main road, no detours, no loops. She tried asking locals about it, but they all shook their heads, saying the back roads were safe and well mapped. Some of them mentioned rumors, stories of people getting lost in the woods at night, vanishing without a trace, but she brushed it off as coincidence. Weeks later, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Shadows in the corner of her eye, figures in empty parking lots, whispers in the wind. Every time she drove past a dark, wooded area, her pulse quickened, her grip on the steering wheel tightening. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up, thinking she saw the same figure at the foot of her bed, tall, still, and watching. She moved cities eventually, hoping distance would erase the memory. But no matter where she went, the wrong turn haunted her dreams. Roads that twisted unnaturally, shadows that stretched beyond the light, and that whispering voice just out of reach. Each time she closed her eyes, the mist rose again, curling through the trees, and she could feel the figure waiting, patient, watching, always pointing, always there. Even now, when she drives through a quiet stretch of road, she slows down instinctively, scanning the tree line for any movement, any hint that she might have taken another wrong turn. Her friends tease her about it, calling her paranoid, but she knows better. Some roads are not meant to be taken at night. Some turns are never truly wrong. They lead you exactly where you are meant to go. She still remembers the sound of the footsteps, soft and deliberate, following her, matching her pace, just beyond the fog. The way the shadows seemed to stretch taller, lean closer, bend in ways they shouldn't. The emptiness of its face, a void in the dark that seemed to swallow all light. And the whispers, always just out of reach, tugging at her mind, repeating words she could never understand but felt in her bones. She hasn't gone back, and she never will. Some nights she dreams of the back road anyway, the gravel crunching under tires that aren't hers, the fog curling like fingers, the figure standing in the middle of the road, waiting. She wakes drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and the memory lingers. She can almost feel it at the edge of her vision, always there, patient, watching, guiding her toward another wrong turn she can never make, another stretch of road that isn't meant to exist. Jenna doesn't drive those back roads anymore. She sticks to highways, to towns with streetlights, to routes mapped and safe. But the memory hasn't faded. Even years later, a simple twist of a road, a foggy night, the whisper of leaves against each other, it all brings her back there. To that night when she took the wrong turn and saw something she cannot explain, something that defies reason and logic, something that still waits in the shadows for anyone foolish enough to stray. And she knows deep down that one day she or someone else might make that same wrong turn. And the figure will be there still in the fog, patient as ever, watching, waiting. Story the end. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, drumming steadily against the windshield as Dylan drove through the back roads of West Virginia. His headlights carved a pale tunnel through the sheets of water, and beyond that there was nothing, just black forest and the narrow two-lane stretch that seemed to coil endlessly ahead of him. His phone sat in the cup holder, screen blank. No signal for the last 40 minutes. The GPS had died when the battery dipped under 10%, and his portable charger was in the glove box of his girlfriend's car, left behind back in Maryland. He'd meant to make it to Charleston before dark, but a wrong turn somewhere near Spencer had dropped him onto this twisting road that didn't exist on any map he remembered. The rain had gotten heavier, the turns sharper, and the signs, when they appeared, had been blank with rust or twisted sideways. He was alone out here, completely alone, at least until he saw the turnoff. It came out of nowhere, a faded green sign half covered by vines. He caught just enough of it in the glare of his headlights to read the word Raventon before it vanished behind him. Dylan slowed the car and reversed carefully, tires slipping a little in the mud. The sign pointed down a narrow gravel road that disappeared into the trees. He hesitated. He didn't remember passing Raventon on the map, but maybe it connected to Route 119. At this point, anywhere with lights sounded better than endless forest. He turned onto the road. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, and branches brushed against the sides of the car as if the forest were closing in. The rain eased a little, but the fog thickened, rolling low across the ground. A few minutes later, he saw lights ahead. At first, he thought it was his imagination, just a trick of the fog, but then the shapes came into view. Old wooden houses, slanted porches, and a main street lined with dim yellow lamps that flickered as if starved for power. He exhaled in relief. Civilization. He drove slowly through the town, looking for a gas station or diner. The buildings looked frozen in time, paint peeling, windows cracked, roofs sagging. He didn't see a single car or person. The first sign of life was an old general store with one light burning above the entrance. A hand-painted board on the door read, "Open." Dylan pulled over and stepped out. The rain had softened to a mist, and the air was colder than it should have been for late summer. He entered the store. A small bell jingled over the door. Inside smelled like wet wood and something faintly metallic. Shelves lined with canned goods and dusty jars stretched along the walls. Behind the counter stood an old man in suspenders, his face half hidden by shadow. "Evenin'," the man said, his voice rasped, dry and uneven. "Hey," Dylan replied. "Sorry to bother you. My GPS took me off course, trying to get back to Route 119. Can you tell me how far it is from here?" The man didn't answer right away. He just stared, eyes watery and pale. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't be out tonight." Dylan blinked. "What do you mean? Roads ain't safe after dark?" The man murmured, "Not since the Hollow opened." Dylan frowned. "The Hollow?" The man turned away, pretending to rearrange something on a shelf. "If you're smart, you'll go back the way you came. Now." "Sir, The man's hand trembled as he pointed toward the door. "Go." Dylan stood there for a moment, unsure what to do, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Thanks for the advice." He left the store, uneasy. The air outside had changed. He could feel it. The mist had thickened into something heavier, by almost smoky, and the lamps along the street seemed dimmer. He got into the car, started the engine, and pulled back toward the road he'd come from. But when he reached the edge of town, the road wasn't there anymore. Instead of gravel, the headlights revealed nothing but a wall of fog. He slowed, heart pounding. What the hell? He reversed, turned around, drove back toward town, but it wasn't the same town anymore. The lights were out. The general store was dark. The buildings looked older now, roofs collapsed, windows missing. Weeds grew through the cracks in the street. "Okay," he muttered to himself, gripping the wheel tighter. "Okay, maybe I took the wrong street." He drove on. The mist moved like smoke around the car, swallowing the edges of his vision. Shapes flickered in it, just at the edge of sight. A figure appeared ahead, standing in the middle of the road. Dylan slammed the brakes, tires squealing. The figure didn't move. It was tall, dressed in dark, tattered clothes, head slightly tilted. Dylan rolled down the window, a crack. "Hey!" "You okay?" No answer. He switched on the high beams. The figure vanished. Just gone. The fog rippled where it had been, like it had stepped backward into it. Dylan's pulse hammered. He shifted into reverse, scanning every mirror, but there was nothing behind him, just mist and the faint outlines of the houses. Then something tapped the rear window. Once. Twice. He twisted in his seat, staring into the back seat. Empty. Tap. The sound came again, this time from the side window. He turned just in time to see a handprint appear on the glass, smeared and dripping, like it had been pressed there with mud or blood. He hit the gas. The tires spun in the wet dirt, then caught, propelling the car forward. He didn't care where he was going anymore, as long as it was away. The road wound sharply and the fog grew thicker. The world outside the windows was nothing but shifting white. He didn't see the next sign until it was too late. "Welcome to Raventon." the exact same one he'd seen before. He passed the same general store, now glowing faintly again, the light flickering in the doorway. He'd gone in a circle. No, 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 he whispered, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The bell over the store door jingled. He hadn't stopped. He looked back. The store door was swinging open slowly, though no one was there. The light inside pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then went dark. His radio came on by itself, hissing with static. Then, faintly through the crackle, a woman's voice whispered, "Don't look back." He froze. What? Don't look back. He stared at the road ahead, breathing hard. Something was moving behind the car. He could see it reflected faintly in the rearview mirror. A figure long and crooked, its movements jerky like broken film. It was walking faster now, coming closer, its face a blur in the mist. He couldn't help himself. He looked. The thing was right there. It slammed into the trunk and the car jolted forward. Dylan screamed, floored the gas, and the vehicle fishtailed before catching traction. The thing clung to the rear, its hands slapping against the glass, leaving streaks of something black. He drove until his eyes burned from staring. Then, suddenly, the fog cleared. The road opened ahead, wide, smooth asphalt, streetlights glowing in the distance. He could see the sign for Route 119. He laughed out loud, almost crying from relief. Then the radio hissed again. "Don't stop." He frowned. "What?" The headlights flickered once. Then the engine stuttered. He slammed the dashboard. "Come on, come on." The car coughed and died, coasting to a stop on the shoulder. The rain had stopped. The world was silent. He reached for his phone. Still no signal. When he looked up, the road ahead was gone. The asphalt faded into mist again, thick and gray. And then he saw them. Dozens of figures standing in the fog, surrounding the car. Their outlines were faint, their faces obscured, but he could feel them watching. He locked the doors. His breath fogged the glass. One of the figures stepped forward, a woman, her face pale, hair soaked, dress hanging in tatters. She stopped just inches from the window and smiled, lips splitting too wide. Dylan screamed and hit the horn, but the sound came out muffled, like the air itself was swallowing it. The figures pressed closer. Hands touched the car, on the windows, the hood, the roof. The glass began to creak under the pressure. "Leave me alone," he yelled. Then, just like that, they were gone. The fog lifted. Dylan sat trembling behind the wheel, gasping for air. The road stretched empty ahead, the sign for Route 119 clear as day. He turned the key and the car started immediately. He drove. He didn't stop until morning, when the sun broke through the clouds and the mountains came into view again. When he finally found a diner, he pulled in and stumbled inside. A waitress looked up from behind the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a nervous chuckle. Dylan gave a shaky laugh. "Something like that. I was driving near a town called Raventon." The waitress's face went pale. She set down the coffee pot slowly. "Raventon?" she whispered. "Yeah," Dylan said. "You know it?" She nodded once, her hands trembling. "That town doesn't exist anymore. Got wiped out in the flood back in '62. Whole valley went under." Dylan stared at her. "No, I was there last night." She shook her head. "Honey, you must have taken a wrong turn." Outside, the fog had started to rise again, like curling low across the road. Story the end. The rain had just started when Eric and his two friends, Caleb and Jess, realized they had made a wrong turn somewhere off Route 33. They had been driving all day, trying to make it to a weekend cabin rental in upstate Pennsylvania before dark, but now it was nearly 10 p.m., and the winding back roads had led them deep into unfamiliar territory. The GPS had been glitching for the last hour, spinning in circles on the screen, showing their little blue dot floating in a sea of gray. The car headlights cut through sheets of rain that fell harder by the minute, drumming against the windshield in waves. The trees on either side of the narrow road leaned in close, their branches forming an archway that blocked most of the sky. It felt like the world had shrunk to just the strip of asphalt in front of them and the endless woods pressing in from both sides. "Okay, this can't be right," Jess said, leaning forward from the back seat. "We haven't seen another car in over an hour. What road even is this?" Caleb squinted at the dashboard. "Says County Road 58, but it doesn't even show up on the map." "That's because it's not supposed to be here," Jess muttered. "Seriously, I think we should just turn around." Eric, who was driving, shook his head. I've been trying to find a spot wide enough to turn around for 10 minutes. This road's barely big enough for one car. The rain intensified, and the wipers squealed across the glass. Every few seconds, the headlights flashed across another old, faded road sign, most of them unreadable through the rust and moss. The last one they'd passed said something about Hollow Creek, though most of the letters were missing. "This is how horror movies start," Jess said, hugging her jacket tighter. "Lost in the middle of nowhere, GPS dies, and we end up murdered by some inbred family that lives in the woods." Caleb groaned. "Could you not?" "I'm just saying." "Jess, please," Eric said, cutting her off. He was trying to sound calm, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We're going to be fine. Once we hit an intersection, we'll find our way back to the main road." They drove for another 10 minutes before the rain suddenly stopped. The windshield went from streaked gray to clear in an instant, as if someone had shut off the storm. Eric frowned. The trees were still dripping, but the air felt unnaturally still. No wind, no rain, no movement, just the quiet hum of the car and the wet hiss of the tires on pavement. Caleb leaned forward, glancing at the dashboard. "Dude, your clock's wrong." Eric looked down. The time on the dash read 3:17 a.m. He blinked. "What the hell? That's not possible. It was barely 10. Jess shifted uneasily in her seat. "My phone's dead. Was at 60% an hour ago." Caleb checked his too. The screen wouldn't turn on. Eric tried his next. Nothing. All three phones were completely dead, despite being charged when they'd left home that morning. He swallowed. Probably just a signal thing. Lightning or something messed it up. But his voice didn't sound confident. None of them spoke for a while. The forest seemed to press in tighter, the branches overhead twisting together like interlocking fingers. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, creeping low along the ground, curling around the tires, making it harder and harder to see the road ahead. Then they saw the sign. It stood crooked at the side of the road, its white paint flaking away to reveal old wood underneath. Hand-painted letters spelled out, "Welcome to Ashwood Hollow, Pop 76. Jess leaned forward. "That's creepy." "Maybe they've got a gas station or something," Caleb said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Let's just see." Eric nodded slowly, turning down the narrow road that branched off toward the sign. It felt wrong from the start. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then to packed dirt. Their headlights caught glimpses of old mailboxes, overgrown driveways, and abandoned houses, half swallowed by vines. The windows were black, some shattered, others boarded up. They passed what looked like a church, the sign out front reading First Baptist of Ashwood Hollow, service every Sunday, 9 a.m. The steeple was crooked, and one of the doors swung slowly in the wind, though the air was perfectly still. "Place looks dead," Caleb said quietly. Jess whispered, "Maybe it always was." They came to what might have once been a town square, a few buildings gathered around a cracked fountain. A flickering light caught Eric's attention. Down the street, a single building still glowed with life. It was a diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly through the fog, "Martha's Diner." "Finally," Caleb said. "Let's stop and ask for directions." Eric pulled up in front. The diner's windows glowed orange and warm, but the parking lot was empty. Not a single car in sight. The open sign flickered weakly in the window. Jess hesitated. Something's off about this. Caleb was already opening his door. "I'm not sitting in this car any longer. We'll be in and out." Eric turned off the engine, and the world went silent. The three of them stepped out, gravel crunching under their shoes. The fog pressed close around them, damp and heavy, making it feel like the air itself was watching. Inside, the diner looked normal. Too normal. There were pies in the display case, coffee cups on the counter, a jukebox in the corner softly playing an old country tune that warped in and out of tune as if it were playing through water. A middle-aged woman stood behind the counter, smiling. Her hair was styled in an old-fashioned way, and her apron was spotless. "Well, look at you folks," she said warmly. "Out for a drive in this weather?" Yeah," Eric said, stepping closer. "We took a wrong turn off Route 33 and ended up out here. You wouldn't happen to know how to get back to the main road, would you?" Her smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did, like a flicker of recognition or regret. "Route 33, you say? Haven't had travelers through here in quite some time." "How long is quite some time?" Jess asked, her voice shaky. The woman turned away, reaching for a pot of coffee. Long enough. She poured 3 cups and slid them across the counter. The smell was strange. Not like coffee, but something metallic and sweet. Caleb forced a smile. Thanks, but we should really get going. The woman's eyes lifted to his, and for a split second, her face changed. The skin sagged, the eyes hollowed out, and her mouth stretched too wide. Then she blinked, and it was gone. The smile was back. You'll stay a while, she said softly. Road's not safe after dark. It's already dark, Jess whispered. Then you best not go, the woman replied, her tone final. Eric turned to leave, but when he opened the door, the fog outside was thicker, so thick it looked solid. The car wasn't visible anymore. He stepped out onto the gravel, calling back, Guys, come on. Caleb and Jess followed. The diner lights behind them flickered, then went out completely. When Eric turned around, the diner was gone. The fog cleared just enough for them to see they were standing in the middle of a dirt road. No buildings, no signs, just trees. Jess started crying softly. We didn't walk anywhere. How are we just here? Caleb took out his phone again, still dead. We keep walking. Maybe we find another road. They walked for nearly half an hour. The woods around them grew denser, the fog thicker. Then the road began to change. It started sloping downward, the trees growing gnarled and black. The smell of wet earth gave way to something worse, rot. They came across a rusted car half buried in mud. The driver's door was open, and moss covered most of the interior. Jess ran her hand over the hood, wiping away grime. A name was faintly etched into the metal. Eric. She froze. Eric, it's your name. He stared at it, unable to breathe. That's not possible. Caleb peered inside. There's something on the seat. It was a newspaper. The headline was barely legible, but the words they could make out made their blood run cold. 3 missing travelers found dead in Ashwood Hollow. The photos were old, black and white, but the faces were theirs. Jess screamed. The echo bounced through the trees, followed by something else, a soft shuffle like feet dragging through leaves. Run! Caleb yelled. They took off, crashing through the underbrush. Branches tore at their clothes. Rain-soaked leaves slapped their faces. The sound behind them grew louder. More footsteps, close, then closer still. When Eric glanced back, he saw shadows moving between the trees, flickering in and out of the fog. Dozens of them. He could hear them whispering. His name. Over and over. They stumbled into a clearing where a single light flickered. A lamppost standing in the middle of nowhere, casting a weak circle of yellow glow. Underneath it was a small sign nailed to a post. Leaving Ashwood Hollow. Come again soon. Caleb didn't hesitate. He sprinted past it, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Jess and Eric followed, but the ground gave way beneath them. They fell hard, tumbling down a muddy slope until they landed in freezing water. The creek at the bottom was shallow, but the shock of cold knocked the wind out of them. Eric surfaced first, coughing, calling out for the others. Jess! Caleb! No answer. Just the sound of dripping water and the whisper of wind through the trees. He climbed onto the bank, shivering. The woods were darker here. The fog glowed faintly, lit by a strange, pale light. Ahead, he saw movement. Jess stood at the edge of the trees, her back turned. Jess! He shouted. She didn't respond. He ran toward her, slipping on wet rocks, his heart pounding. When he reached her, she finally turned, and his blood froze. Her face was pale and swollen, her eyes black and empty. Mud streaked her clothes. Her lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. You should have stayed on the road. He stumbled backwards, screaming her name. She took a step toward him, jerky, unnatural. Then another. Behind her, more shapes emerged, Caleb among them, his face gray, his mouth twisted into something that wasn't a smile. Their eyes all fixed on Eric. He turned and ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until the forest blurred into streaks of gray and black. Then, just when his legs were about to give out, he saw lights, headlights, bright and real. A truck horn blared. Tires screeched. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the shoulder of Route 33. Rain poured down. The truck driver was shouting, Hey, you okay, buddy? You almost ran right in front of me. Eric blinked up at him, dazed. Where am I? Route 33, the man said. You're lucky I saw you in time. There was no sign of Jess or Caleb. No fog. No Ashwood Hollow. Just highway and rain. Days later, when he told the police, they said there was no Ashwood Hollow anywhere in the county. The only thing they found was an old overgrown road, County Road 58, closed off since 1972 after a landslide buried the town. Eric didn't believe them until he went back himself. At the base of the overgrown trail, behind a thicket of dead trees, was a single rusted sign. Welcome to Ashwood Hollow, Pop 76. As the wind blew through the forest, he could have sworn he heard Digest's voice for his name one last time. Story the end. It started as a simple weekend trip, an easy drive from Nashville to Asheville to visit an old college friend. The sun had already dipped below the trees by the time Lindsay passed the Tennessee border, her car cutting through the rolling hills and stretches of forest that seemed endless in every direction. She was supposed to arrive by 8. At 9:30, she was still on the road. The GPS had lost its signal somewhere after a construction detour. Lindsay had taken a turn onto what she thought was Route 68, but the pavement had grown narrow and cracked, the kind of forgotten road that didn't feel right the moment you were on it. Her headlights carved through thick patches of fog, and every so often she'd pass an old mailbox or the silhouette of a barn, but otherwise it was empty. The deeper she drove, the more she felt like the road was folding in on itself, curving back the way she'd come even though she never turned. She tried her phone again. No service. The little bar in the corner mocked her with its emptiness. She sighed, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. "It's fine," she muttered. "It's just back roads." But the voice in her head wasn't convinced. The road didn't have the familiar rhythm of country routes. No street signs, no intersections, not even mile markers. The yellow lines down the center had faded to ghosts. After another 10 minutes of silence, she saw a sign emerge through the fog. Milford. 5 miles. She didn't recognize the name. Her GPS didn't either when she'd still had service. But she figured 5 miles wasn't bad. Maybe there'd be a gas station, or at least somewhere to turn around. She drove on. The forest thickened, trees hunched close over the road, branches scraping across her roof like nails. The fog grew so dense it felt alive, rolling in slow, pulsing waves. Her high beams only made it worse, reflecting the light back at her in a blinding white haze. She slowed down. The sound of gravel under her tires changed suddenly to a dull, hollow thud. She frowned and rolled to a stop. When she looked out the window, she realized she wasn't on asphalt anymore. The road had turned into wooden planks, an old bridge stretching over dark water that looked almost black. Lindsay hesitated. The fog was thicker on the other side, hiding what lay beyond. But she couldn't reverse. The road behind her had vanished into a white wall. "Okay," she whispered, "just across the bridge, then find somewhere to pull over." The car crept forward. Each board groaned beneath her tires. The fog swallowed the sound of everything else, the engine, her breathing, even the wind. Halfway across, her headlights flickered. Once, twice. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, soft, distorted, like someone whispering from inside the dashboard. "Don't stop." Lindsay froze, staring at the stereo. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The voice came again, this time from behind her. "Don't stop." She slammed her foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, wood snapping beneath her, but she made it to the other side. Her pulse thundered in her ears. As soon as her tires hit solid ground again, the road widened. The fog thinned slightly, revealing the outlines of a small town. Milford. It didn't look abandoned exactly, but it didn't look alive either. Streetlights buzzed faintly, their orange glow casting sickly halos across cracked sidewalks. A row of stores lined the main street, barbershop, hardware, diner, but every window was dark. No people. No cars. Lindsay pulled up in front of the diner, relieved to see light coming from inside. The neon open sign flickered weakly in the window. She parked and stepped out, her boots crunching on gravel. The night air smelled of wet wood and iron, like rain that had never stopped. When she pushed open the diner door, a bell chimed overhead. The smell of old coffee and something sour hit her. "Hello?" she called out. A woman's voice answered from behind the counter. "Evenin'." Lindsay's shoulders relaxed slightly. A middle-aged waitress in a faded uniform stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was gray and pulled into a bun, her eyes dull but kind. "Sorry," Lindsay said with a nervous laugh. "My GPS crapped out. I think I took a wrong turn somewhere around, Route 68? The waitress tilted her head. "Ain't no Route 68 near here, sweetheart. Closest highway's 20 miles east." Lindsay frowned. "Oh, I must have messed up then." "You lost?" "Pretty much. Just trying to get to Asheville." The woman smiled faintly. You're a long way from Asheville. Lindsay chuckled awkwardly. Figures. You sit down, the woman said. I'll get you some coffee. Roads get tricky this time of night. Lindsay slid into a booth. The vinyl seat was cracked and cold. The woman poured her a cup and set it down. The steam rose slow and thin, barely warm. You get a lot of travelers through here? Lindsay asked. The woman didn't answer right away. She stared out the window at the empty street. Used to. Not anymore? The woman shook her head. Roads change, towns die, happens all the time. Something in her tone made Lindsay uneasy. The way she said it felt final, like an obituary. Is there a gas station nearby? Lindsay asked. There's one a mile down the road, the woman said. But you be careful. Fog gets worse near the creek. Lindsay nodded, forcing a smile. She took a sip of the coffee and almost gagged. It was cold. She set it down quickly. When she looked up again, the waitress was gone. Ma'am? She called. No answer. Lindsay stood and looked around. The diner was silent. The bell over the door was still swaying, though it hadn't made a sound when the woman left. Something moved outside, just a shadow passing slowly across the window. She stepped closer, peering out. The street was empty again. Her heart thudded once, heavy and hard. She turned and hurried out the door, back toward her car. The town was darker now. The streetlights flickered out one by one as she passed. The silence pressed in until she could hear her own heartbeat. When she reached her car, she froze. There were wet footprints on the pavement leading up to the driver's side door, bare feet, small, like a child's. Her breath caught. She turned slowly, scanning the fog. Hello? Nothing. She opened the car door and climbed inside, locking it quickly. Her hands trembled as she turned the key. The engine sputtered, then died. She tried again. Nothing. The air inside the car felt heavier suddenly, cold. Her breath fogged the windshield. Then, faintly, a tapping sound came from outside. Tap, tap, tap from the passenger window. She turned her head slowly. The glass was fogged over, but a small handprint was pressed against it. Then another. Then more. She screamed, fumbling for the ignition. The car roared to life this time, lights flaring. She slammed it into drive and sped forward. As she did, the radio switched on by itself. A man's voice, crackling old, spoke through the static. You shouldn't be here. She tried to shut it off, but the dial wouldn't budge. The voice continued, louder now. Road don't like strangers. The fog thickened again, swallowing the road. She could barely see a few feet ahead. She leaned forward, squinting. Something appeared in the headlights, a figure standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched. The figure didn't move. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He wore soaked clothes, clinging to a thin frame. His head tilted to one side, his mouth hanging open just slightly. Lindsay's heart raced. Oh my God, she whispered. She honked the horn. The sound was muffled, almost as if the fog swallowed it. The man didn't flinch. Then slowly he lifted his hand and pointed past her car, back toward the bridge. Lindsay threw the car in reverse and spun the wheel, heading the opposite direction. She didn't care where it led anymore. The road twisted and turned through the trees. The fog followed, creeping through the cracks in her windows. Her eyes burned. Finally, she saw another sign. Milford Creek, 1 mile. Her stomach sank. She'd gone in a circle. No, 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 she muttered. She tried turning off onto a side path, but it only led back into the forest. Branches scraped her car. Something ran across the road ahead. Something on all fours, too fast to be an animal. Her headlights caught it just for an instant. It was a child, or something shaped like one, crawling through the mud with jerky, unnatural movements. Its skin was gray, its eyes white and glassy. Lindsay swerved, nearly crashing into a tree. She kept driving, breath coming in ragged gasps. When she reached the bridge again, she didn't stop. She floored the gas. The planks groaned, splintered, but held. She could see the faint outline of open road beyond. Then the headlights flickered, and for a moment she saw them. Dozens of figures standing in the fog on either side of the bridge. Men, women, children, their faces pale and swollen, clothes dripping wet. They were watching her. One of them reached out as she passed, their hand brushing against her window, leaving a wet streak across the glass. The bridge gave a deafening crack. The car lurched violently, one tire slipping through a broken board. Lindsay screamed and hit the gas. The car shot forward, wood exploding beneath it as she reached the other side. When she looked back, the bridge was gone. only dark water churned below. She didn't stop driving, not for an hour, not for two. By dawn, she reached a gas station, a real one this time, with bright fluorescent lights and the smell of fresh coffee. The clerk looked up as she stumbled in, pale and shaking. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "Just took a wrong turn." The man frowned. "Yeah, Milford." The clerk's face drained of color. "Milford? Honey, that place ain't there no more. Got flooded out in the 70s, ain't been nothing down that way since." Lindsay stared at him, unable to speak. He looked uneasy. "You didn't cross no bridge, did you?" Her throat went dry. "Yeah." He shook his head slowly. "Ain't been no bridge there in decades." Lindsay stumbled back outside. Her car sat in the morning light, mud caked to the tires, streaks of water running down the windows. She hesitated before getting in. There, on the passenger window, was a single handprint, small, wet, and perfectly clear. She wiped it away, but the outline remained faintly visible beneath the glass, like it was burned there. For the rest of her life, whenever Lindsay drove at night, she avoided country roads. But sometimes when the fog rolled in and the radio hissed, she swore she could hear a voice whispering through the static. "Don't stop." Story the end. The night was already halfway gone by the time Erin realized she'd made the wrong turn. The last exit had looked familiar, same shape of sign, same slope of road, and she'd taken it without thinking, humming to the low drone of her car's engine. Now, the pavement had narrowed into a cracked, uneven stretch that wound deeper into the woods, and her GPS arrow spun uselessly in circles. Her phone had lost service 10 minutes back, and there hadn't been a single other car since. Just the rhythmic flicker of her high beams against wet asphalt and the heavy darkness pressing in from the trees. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the road slick and glistening. She wasn't supposed to be out here. Her route home from her parents' cabin should have taken her back toward the main highway, a clean 2-hour drive to Richmond. Instead, she'd been driving for nearly 3.5, chasing faintly lit intersections that led nowhere. The clock on her dashboard blinked 12:43 a.m. The gas needle hovered just above empty. "Great," she muttered, slapping the steering wheel. "Real smart, Erin." She slowed the car as the road dipped suddenly, winding through a hollow dense with fog. The beams of her headlights barely cut through it. The mist seemed to move on its own, swirling like breath in the cold air. Then she saw a sign ahead, wooden, faded, barely standing. She slowed enough to read it. Hollow Creek, 3 miles. Finally. She breathed out, a mix of relief and caution. The sign looked old, but maybe it was one of those small Appalachian towns that time forgot. Gas station, diner, maybe a motel. She'd settle for a pump and a cup of coffee. The road narrowed again, curling through trees so tall they blocked out what little moonlight there was. Every now and then she thought she saw gaps between them, glimpses of something white, fog, maybe, or a house. But when she turned her head, it was gone. Her radio buzzed suddenly, a static hiss that made her jump. It had been silent the whole drive. She fiddled with the dial, but every channel was the same, a low, uneven hum that sometimes crackled into what sounded almost like words. Then, just as abruptly, it went dead again. She sighed and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The rain had thinned to a drizzle now, but the fog was thicker, heavy and low, curling under her headlights like smoke. After another few bends, the trees opened, revealing a small bridge. The wooden planks were slick and black from the rain, the railings low and rotted in places. She hesitated before driving onto it. The air felt colder here. Still. As she crossed, her headlights caught a shape on the other side. Something crouched on the edge of the road. Her breath hitched. It looked like a person at first. Thin, pale, but its limbs were twisted, bent in strange angles, its face turned away from the light. She blinked, and it was gone. Her heart pounded. She drove faster, refusing to look in the mirrors. Maybe it had been a trick of the fog, a reflection. Her mind was just tired. The road curved again and opened into what looked like a town, or what used to be one. Hollow Creek. Street lamps buzzed weakly, some burned out, some flickering like dying fireflies. Wooden storefronts lined the main street, their paint stripped by time. A small post office sat on the corner, and across from it, a diner with a neon sign that still glowed faintly red, Harper's Eatery. But there were no cars, no lights inside the windows. Erin slowed, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The buildings looked intact, too intact for an abandoned place. Curtains hung neatly in windows, chairs were tucked under tables. It was like the whole town had simply frozen in time. She spotted a gas station at the far end of the street. Its sign read Hollow Creek Fuel Stop, one fluorescent light flickering over the awning. "Please," she whispered, pulling up beside the pumps. She shut off the engine and climbed out, clutching her jacket close. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. The pump looked ancient. Metal body rusted, nozzle cracked. She lifted it anyway. It worked loose with a groan, but no fuel came out. "Of course," she muttered. A bell jingled faintly from the small convenience store attached to the station. Erin froze. The sound had come from inside. She hadn't touched the door. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. No answer. She walked slowly to the entrance. The glass door was fogged with moisture from inside, but faint light glowed behind it. She pushed it open. The bell chimed again. Inside, it smelled faintly of old wood and motor oil. Rows of dusty snacks lined the shelves, and a radio behind the counter played low static. Then a voice broke the silence. "Evenin'." Erin turned. A man stood behind the counter, tall, with a narrow face and deep-set eyes. His clothes looked worn, his flannel soaked through, but he smiled faintly. "Car trouble?" he asked. "Ran low on gas," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Do your pumps still work?" He tilted his head. "Cash only. Always have been." She dug into her pocket and pulled out a few bills. "I've got cash. I'll take whatever 20 gets me." He nodded, taking the money without counting. "Pump's finicky. I'll turn it on for you." He stepped out from behind the counter, moving slowly, almost limping. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Erin noticed his skin looked odd. Pale, but not from the cold. Like there was no color in it at all. She followed him outside. The rain had stopped completely now, but the fog hung thick over the street. He twisted something on the pump and nodded to her. "Should work now. Thanks," she said. "Do you know how far this road runs? My GPS isn't picking anything up." He gave her a strange look. "Ain't many roads that lead out of Hollow Creek. Not anymore." A chill crawled up her spine. "What do you mean?" "Used to be a through road years ago," he said, his voice almost wistful. "But the floods took most of it. Folks left. Some didn't." She tried to smile. "Well, I'll just backtrack the way I came then." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then he said softly, "If you can find your way back." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and went back inside. She swallowed hard, filled her tank quickly, and climbed back into her car. She glanced at the shop window. The man was standing inside, still staring at her. Her stomach knotted. She started the car and pulled out fast, tires hissing on wet pavement. The fog seemed even thicker now, curling around the buildings as she passed. She glanced at the clock, 12:43 a.m. Still, her phone buzzed once, a faint flicker of life, and the GPS arrow reappeared. But the map was blank. Just a green void where Hollow Creek should be. She kept driving. After a few minutes, she passed the bridge again. She slowed. That wasn't possible. She'd been driving away from it. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed. This time, the static came back in her speakers. Not just static, a whisper. "Turn back." She froze. The voice was low, genderless, barely audible over the hum of the car. "Who's there?" she said, voice shaking. No reply, just another whisper. Her name. Erin. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She switched off the radio entirely, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside the car now, crawling through the air vents, brushing against her ears like a breath. She sped up. After another mile, her headlights caught movement up ahead. Someone standing in the middle of the road. She hit the brakes, tires screeching. It was the man from the gas station, but his clothes were dry now. His face looked different. Wrong somehow. Hollow. His eyes were black pits, reflecting the headlights like glass. Erin threw the car in reverse, panic rising, but the engine sputtered and died. The man started walking toward her, slow, deliberate. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, but it was dead. He was closer now. 10 feet. 5. Then, just as suddenly, he was gone. Erin blinked, gasping. The road ahead was empty. She slammed her foot on the pedal. The car started again, roaring to life. She tore down the road, every instinct screaming at her to get out. But the road didn't end. It twisted endlessly, always turning back on itself. Every few minutes, she'd pass the same crooked sign, Hollow Creek, 3 miles. Each time the sign looked older, more decayed. She started to cry without realizing it. "Please," she whispered, "please just let me out." Then she saw something new, a house off the road, its porch light on. She stopped, desperate. Maybe someone could help her, tell her where she was. The front yard was overgrown, weeds curling up through the fence. The porch steps creaked under her weight as she climbed them. The light inside was warm and dim. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. It turned easily. The smell hit her first, damp wood, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. She stepped inside slowly, calling out, "Hello?" The living room looked frozen in time. Old floral furniture, a clock on the mantel stopped at 12:43, photographs on the wall too faded to make out. Then she heard it. A soft sound from the hallway. Footsteps. "Hello?" she said again, her voice smaller now. A door at the end of the hall was slightly open. Faint light spilled out from behind it, flickering. She took a step closer. The floorboards groaned under her feet. The closer she got, the colder the air became. She pushed the door open. Inside was an old bedroom. A single lamp burned on the dresser, and sitting on the bed was the same man from the gas station. Only now his skin looked gray, sunken tight over bone. His eyes were hollow, his head turned toward her slowly. "Didn't I tell you?" he said, his voice nothing but a whisper. "Ain't many roads leading out of Hollow Creek." Erin stumbled back, shaking her head. No, this isn't real." He smiled faintly. "Oh, it's real. You just took the wrong road, the one that don't end." The light flickered and went out. Erin screamed and ran. She bolted through the hallway, the living room, out the door. The night air hit her like ice. She didn't look back. When she reached her car, she jumped in, slammed the door, and hit the ignition. It started. She drove blind, following nothing but instinct until the fog finally began to thin. The road straightened. Then suddenly she was back on the highway. Dry pavement, clear air. Her dashboard clock read 2:11 a.m. She didn't stop until she reached the next town 20 miles later. She pulled into a brightly lit gas station and just sat there trembling. When she went inside to pay, the clerk looked up at her. "You okay, ma'am? You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a weak laugh. "Just got lost. Ended up in some place called Hollow Creek." The man's face went pale. "What'd you say?" "Hollow Creek," she repeated. "Tiny place, gas station, diner." He shook his head slowly. "That town was wiped out 30 years ago. Landslide took it clean off the map. Nobody's lived there since." Erin stared at him, her blood running cold. She turned slowly toward the window. Her car sat under the fluorescent light, all clean except for one thing. Muddy handprints smeared across the back windshield. Story the end.